The meeting. This is the June 12th, 2025 work session for the Williamson County Board of Education. We have a quorum barely. Not that we really need one for this, but it's pretty light tonight. All right, we will get started with the consent agenda. There's been a request to remove both of the policies for second reading from consent. So 4.601 and 6.411 will be pulled off consent. I'm going to move those down to, for tonight's discussion, down to new business and add it at the end. So there'll be an item F where we will discuss those at that point in time. Any other questions or comments about other items on the consent agenda? All right, we will move to Superintendent's report, where we've got some hot off the presses information from the County Commission Budget Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will speak to that first. The County Commission Budget Committee actually called for a special called meeting that started today at 4:30 p.m. and it's now about 5 after 6. That's unusual for them, but it was called to address the budget. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a nutshell. And actually, Rachel Farmer, our CFO, and Brian King, our Assistant Superintendent for Operations, actually stayed at the meeting when I had to leave to get over here on time. The core of what they were discussing is the proposal that the Budget Committee published includes a 5-cent gap in county government's budget and a 5-cent gap in schools' budget. And you all knew about the schools piece. And so they had a detailed discussion, and we're in the process of voting on some items related to that budget. The gist of what I saw as they were going through that was they were looking for ways to shrink the number of pennies that where they had a gap on their proposed expenses and the revenue. So I'm gonna hit a couple of those items, and Rachel may come in during some of this discussion. So they addressed one expense item on our budget, and that was our health insurance cost. Right now, there's a $70 million, just a little bit over $70 million item in our budget where we pay to the county government for in essence self-insurance claims. That's the amount that they've projected for us. The mayor actually recommended that they reduce the FTE, the full-time equivalent request for each one of those health insurance folks by $500. The net result in that is they were in the process of reducing the budget approval by $2.65 million for that addressing that one item. What that means for them is that would reduce the tax rate by a penny. So that's 1 penny off our 5. They also had some discussion and had not yet hit the point where they were voting on the revenue side of their debt service. And the discussion they had was there is about, and actually not all this detail was shared there, but some of this is what I just know. There's about $90 million sitting in the impact fee fund for growth. They had some detailed discussions with their bond counsel and their general counsel related to that, and they determined that they can actually spend some of that impact fee money on accrued capital that they have previously spent on growth. In other words, principal on their debt. So they did the math on that, and they project that they can actually spend about 2 pennies on the tax rate by using some of that $90 million on the bond debt service. And they went through multiple issues related to that. That included the rural debt. It also included the general debt. Some of the general debt is county government debt. Some is schools debt. But the net is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Rachel, they increased they actually reduced the need for revenue by about $5.8 million with that, if in fact they actually voted on it. And Rachel, as I left, they had not yet voted on that. Okay, I've just been told they did approve that, and again, this is the Budget Committee. They also worked on the question of, could they reduce a couple of pennies by changing the projected revenue for property taxes? And you all may recall, we've mentioned that per the county standards, we actually project property tax revenue at 92% of actual. And the net result for that typically is that extra 8% or 7.5% or whatever ends up being received by county government and us ends up going into fund balance, and then it rolls to the next year. The mayor actually mentioned changing that projection to 94% of property tax receipts. In other words, going from a projected 92% revenue to 94% revenue, which in essence would again reduce the gap. And Rachel, if I'm not mistaken, that's the equivalent of 2 pennies? 2 pennies. So that's 5 cents right there. But if I'm not mistaken, 4 of those pennies are us and 1 of those pennies is county, or something to that effect. If you would, turn your microphone on.
So the final tax rate that was voted on tonight was $1.30, 27 cents for county general fund, 3 cents for solid waste, 75 cents for schools, 15 cents for general debt, and then 9 cents for rural debt. So rural debt was reduced by 2 cents, county general was reduced by a penny, and we were reduced by 2 pennies for a
Okay.
total of 5.
Total of 5 cents. So the net impact on us, if this ultimately passes the county commission on June 20th, which is their actual vote, is, Rachel, if I'm not mistaken, the revenue side won't impact our budgeting at all, those 3 cents where they've changed the revenue projection. But there is the impact of the reduced ask for health insurance, which means that if that passes on June 20th, we will need to amend our budget because we will have a less expense in that than we actually projected. The peculiarity for us is that insurance is built into multiple spots in our budget because we have general education, we have special education, we have maintenance. Every department that has people has some of that money in it. So this just happened. We're trying to make a decision on whether to recommend to you to add something to Monday's meeting to do that, or wait till we know for sure this is actually going to happen on June 20th. And Mr. Chair, I know you want to speak to that.
So I guess I have 2 questions. One is, what was the vote on the committee?
The
4
vote
to
was
1?
4-1.
And then the other question is there the ability for us to start the fiscal year with expenses higher than our revenue, which is effectively what would happen if we didn't proactively vote to reduce our expenses on insurance?
I very briefly spoke with the CFO for the county as well. We need to have a balanced budget approved by June 30th, by July 1, if possible. So you could, but there would be ramifications that come back to the state, from the state, in that the county did not file a balanced budget by June 30th. And when I say ramifications, there's not necessarily a penalty or fine. It does happen, but there is some recognition and that goes along to help the AAA bond rating as well if it's filed by June 30th.
Okay, and so the choice we have, I guess this is a question, is the choice we have to either vote to amend our budget ahead of their final vote and then hope that it aligns, or to wait till they vote and then we have a special call meeting to do one thing, which is to amend our budget?
That's correct.
So if we reduced insurance, so what's $4 million? roughly?
2.65 million.
How much?
2.65.
That's
That's in the
Oh,
that's in the general
General.
fund. There's some amount that would be in the cafeteria fund and then the extended school fund as well.
okay. But I thought a penny was closer to
It's
2 million.
2.694 is the actual,
Oh, thank you.
total.
But if we reduced our budget and they didn't, and they approve I guess if they approved our budget, but didn't decrease our insurance costs, then we'd have to go find that cost somewhere else. Because they're not approving the line items of our budget, just the number.
That's correct. They're approving the bottom line number. So the essence of this is the proposal from the county budget committee to the full commission is to approve what you all voted on minus $2.65 million. So their approved number is going to be that much less than what you all voted on a couple of months ago to submit to them.
I guess what's the ramification if they approve a lower number, then they're gonna have to, then they'll just have to fund it, or then they'll have to, and if they don't, I just don't want it to come back. I'm trying to envision what it would look like if we lower our number, and like what's the downside?
Well, if we lower our number and they approve another number, we will have lowered our number to no good purpose. So that would be the argument for waiting. And now I will say in this particular item, Rachel, I know you want to speak.
You can tell. The insurance, they are definitely lowering the insurance regardless of what tax rate they vote on. The insurance is something that they've looked at, they've projected out, and feel like that they can lower the cost this year, with the understanding that they are negotiating essentially contracts with Cigna for the next year. And that the quotes that came in, the original on those bids that came through, was already lower. So that's why they feel confident that that's not going to change.
But they could put whatever number that they wanted to, and if actuals came in more, they could just take it out of fund balance.
They could. So just so you know, what was originally the approved budget for us was $565,306,797. That's what the board has approved. What they've approved tonight, the budget committee, for the resolution that will go before the commission, is $562,612,797. So they're already presenting the lower number. The commission is, and then we would be the ones that would have to come back and amend to that number regardless. So by going ahead and doing it, I don't know that there's really any danger in doing that, because the reduction in insurance costs for us is going to happen one way or the other.
So if our expense number matches the one they approved tonight, then it doesn't really matter what the components of it are.
That's correct.
I mean, my concern is just that they honor that insurance reduction is real, because if the only reductions we're making are costs that are coming from the county, then there is no risk. But if for some reason the commission didn't vote to reduce, but we voted to reduce our number, then now we've got to cut another $2.5 million out of our budget.
That's right.
Did you have something?
What was that number that they're going to approve?
The total was $562,612,797.
I have one more question. You mentioned impact fees, Jason.
Yeah,
$90 million in that pot of money?
that's correct.
Was that not for schools?
That is for schools, and that can only be spent for schools and growth items related to schools. So they can't just spend it for maintenance. They can only spend it for schools' growth items.
So what percentage were we getting during growth periods from that? I mean,
Yeah.
That's a big pot of money.
Yeah,
just sitting there.
it's been in place, I'm trying to remember, since 2017.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for every home. And so they have been spending some of that. When we've made requests for projects over the last 7 or 8 years, they've had to decide how to fund that, and they've been paying some of that. Some of their, when we think about them going to bond market, some of their decisions have included, let's spend some of that impact fee money to cover some of those costs. But again, they can only do it for items that they commit to growth. So what they did when they went through that brainstorming session of asking that question, if we've committed debt to growth items since 2017 for the schools, can we cover some of the principal payments that we're having to make annually on those bonds with that impact fee? And the short answer they got was yes. So their total tax rate includes some money for debt service. And so what they determined was they could, looking back at when they did the bonds for some of growth, and I'll give you some specific examples. Arrington Elementary School, and let's see, I think maybe the first one may have been the Scales Elementary expansion. From that window of time from where we expanded Scales to Arrington, anything that we built related to growth, they've determined that they can cover the principal annual payments with that fund. So it saves a little bit on the tax rate.
What's a penny, $1 million? Or
2.7.
2.7?
So Mr. Cash, the current year's value of a penny is 1.8, and next year's value is 2.7. And that's a big issue that they've been talking about as well. The total tax rate's $1.88 currently on every $1,000 value. The reappraisal that they went through has dropped the tax rate to $1.24.33 something. So the original proposal from the budget committee, let's say 3-4 weeks ago, was to raise the tax rate from $1.24 to $1.34. And so now they're talking about, after all this detail with this special called meeting, reduce that proposed $1.34 to $1.29. It is convoluted.
Yeah, yeah.
So the insurance cost is perpetual, I guess, if our costs are gonna go down. But so did they vote to change the 92% to 94%?
They did.
And so all that does, I mean, that buys us a year, but then next year we're gonna have to make it up on the tax rate.
Well, that's right, because
We're gonna have a lower fund balance to,
you're exactly right. And actually, Commissioner Herbert spoke to that. And Rachel, I wasn't at the vote. Was she the one?
She was the one
So she said she was concerned about that because it was that one-time shot. And so the vote to approve this was 4-1 on Budget Committee, and she was the one, based on my hearing from her, she doesn't want to do that, which means that there still could be a discussion and maybe some conflicting votes at the commission level on that question come June 20th. And she's the chair of the Budget Committee this year. And I don't want to speak for her, but my projection of that discussion was that they would be better off having that one more penny on the tax rate so that they don't lose that 92% fund balance protection.
So from a public notice perspective, would we have time to change our agenda for Monday night to make that budget change, knowing that it's not on the agenda now?
Dana, I'm speaking for you a little bit, but my understanding of that rule is because we have a regularly scheduled meeting, we can change and add to the agenda.
We've got 48 hours to give notice. So if we publish an agenda tomorrow, it needs to be an item. So it's a really quick turnaround, given that it's a committee vote and not the full commission vote.
but our alternative is a special call meeting before July 1.
Yeah, in that window between June 20th and July 1.
I mean, it kind of feels like we're in a little bit of rock and a hard place here, right? Being asked to make a decision without knowing what are the rules of the game. You know, special called meeting, middle of summer doesn't sound enjoyable, but it's not the end of the world. I don't know, shooting from the hip, here, not, just hearing about this. I think it's almost preferable to know, and make decisions off of knowledge base rather than sort of projection of what happened 20 minutes ago in
Yeah.
committee meeting.
As a
It was-
practical matter, just from looking at calendar, so the
Yeah.
20th, that they would meet on the budget committee is a Friday. So, and then the 30th is a Monday. So then you're really talking about sometime between the 23rd and the 27th being realistically the only 5 days that that meeting could happen.
Well, we could do it on the 20th after lunch we're trying to be done by, they typically are done by lunch is the goal. And then we have a lunch afterwards, which presumably we're all invited, but I don't know if we can get a quorum there. But if we could get a quorum, that's a potential. We'll all be there, or we're at least invited.
This is putting everyone on the spot, but can everyone pull out calendars and just see quickly general availability, not asking for specifics, general availability on the 20th or the 23rd through the 27th?
I will be out of town, but I can call in, correct?
If you're on camera, you can.
Well, and depending upon the reason you're out of town, so just shoot me a text as to why. If you're on a family vacation, you can't vote.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
the city of Franklin will have the auditorium, they're already booked. The city of Franklin already has the auditorium booked on the 24th and the 26th for their monthly meetings, just a FYI.
In the evenings, right?
Yes, sir.
Mhm. We can do it here.
We could, yes. We can have it in here.
Say that again? Sorry.
23rd to the 25th. I'm out of state, but it's work related. So, anytime when it is, probably get away for a.
Let's do this. Just sometime tonight before you go to bed, just send me an email. Me and Jason, please send an email about availability, those, what would effectively be 6 weekdays, the 20th and then the 23rd through the 27th. And then we can just make a decision if we need to have that meeting. Does anyone else have a feeling or a preference about doing it before their final vote versus after their final vote? I for one don't have any problem doing it before if you feel very confident that that revenue or that expense number is going to stick.
It's at least gonna be that, but there could be other changes that happen on the floor on the 20th. That is an absolute possibility. So you could have a vote if
Yeah.
you voted on Monday, we could still have the possibility of needing to have a special called.
Yeah, this is definitely not a predictable budget year for the county commission.
As opposed to all the other years that are so.
Any other thoughts or feedback? That really wasn't part of our planned agenda and discussion, but it's important. So any other instant reactions to this? Okay. We'll see availability and let that sort of drive at least in part, drive the decision, because if we can't get a quorum, then it may not be an option.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. We had on the agenda the superintendent's report for 45 minutes. I actually didn't have that time scheduled. I sent you all an email a few days ago related to some detailed questions that were asked on the work that we had done related to the strategic plan and the school start times. Many of you asked some questions related to research. Mr. King and his team gave you some detail related to that, including some analysis kind of with a red and green, negative, positive elements. And his team is here tonight. As I mentioned, we invited you to ask some questions based on that. I will tell you, based on the discussions that we've had with some of you asked for some additional research, and others said, boy, I think I want to take some time to think about this. I'm not sure where we are with moving forward. I want to give you a couple of options. Number one, I'm going to open the floor if you have any specific questions related to that research. And also related to that, I intend to post that on the agenda, even though we don't intend to present those 38 pages in a PowerPoint. That way, folks in the community will be able to see some of that detail. Second piece is we're going to continue to have some discussions related to some of our strategic planning. And the chair had mentioned to you the possibility of having a discussion about where you are as a board related to the strategic plan late this summer. So that's another possibility for us to have some more detailed discussion related to that. I know there was some discussion about where do we go from here? Do we have a vote on that, et cetera? And so the impression I had from the board members was that you weren't ready to commit to that, but I don't want to speak for you. I just wanted to introduce that topic to you. So, Mr. Chair, that was really my follow-up with the board related to the information we gave them in response to the questions we had last month. With it being June, other than budget, I don't have any detailed reports for you.
To follow up on the point about the planning session, at the last work session, we threw out July 30th, and I didn't get a lot of feedback about the availability on that date for a half-day work session, so I'm guessing that's not going to work for most people. So what would be the thinking around the afternoon of the August work session, which is I think the 14th of August? So if we were to convene at 1 o'clock and have a planning session that afternoon leading into the work session, would give us a chance to talk about these items that Jason just mentioned, plus, a couple of other things that, are on the front burner that might warrant a little additional discussion. It might also give us a chance to, this is sort of related to the goals, the annual goals discussion, which we'll get to later in terms of his evaluation now, but we need to think about in an ideal world, getting his goals set earlier than we did this past time. I think it was, remind me, Jason, when your final goals were approved for the current year?
November.
So we approved those in November. He effectively had 6-7 months to act on those before being evaluated. In an ideal world, we'd get those done in his hands in August or September. So it might be that we could use part of that August planning session to talk about goals that we want to set for him for the coming year, and maybe even talk about board goals, if we have our own board goals we want to put down for things we want to work on in the coming year as well. So while you're checking your calendars for the other, please look at August 14th in the afternoon and see if that might work. Anything else for Jason for his report? All right. Anything else?
No, sir.
All right, operations report, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we start on the construction projects update, again, I want to thank Heather, Laura, and Amy for the work that they've done on the start times and all the research and time that they put in. They have been just fantastic, and I want to thank them. Again, I thanked them last time, but it's worth mentioning again. Construction update, Brentwood Middle School, flooring is 95% complete. The ceiling grid is complete, and the final painting has begun, and we should be doing our life safety testing toward the end of the month. The transportation building is complete, and just all that they're doing over there now is punch list items. And the Innovation Center, the block installation is continuing. The second floor slab will be poured tomorrow. And again, this is scheduled to be completed by April 26th of 2026. And our maintenance crew, every year, they do a 3-year asbestos reinspection. They completed that in May. Our safety, our fire project continues, and it's on track. Should be completed by the end of June, and then we'll start in July with phase 2 of that. And there's several projects that our maintenance team starts every summer, and we'll give an update in August on a lot of those as they get completed. But that's my report, and unless you have any questions.
Well, I actually, if I may, Mr. Chair, I want to mention a couple items related to Brian's report. The Innovation Hub is being built on Franklin's campus, Franklin High's campus. Encourage you to drive by. A lot of block is up. We're very excited about that. Just as a reminder, that is being fully funded by a state grant. And I know a couple of you actually mentioned that in your evaluation. We are very excited about that. One interesting anecdote that made me smile is Dr. Snowden and I spoke at Dave Crouch's, I'm having a mental block now, Policy Talks. Thank you. Policy Talks a few Fridays ago, and I know Ms. Hibba, you were there, and some of you watched that. And one of the things I mentioned was that Innovation Hub, and specifically the fire program, the firefighting program that we're adding to that. The chamber used that as a plug for their every other year trip to various areas where there's fast-growing projects going on, because we actually got that idea when we visited Scottsdale, Arizona a couple of years ago. We visited a school district in Metro Phoenix that does nothing but college and career technical education programs. In Metro Phoenix, they actually pull those programs into separate school districts that actually serve maybe 5 or 6 school districts in the region and do nothing but college and career technical education. So it just made me smile that they use that as a plug for their trip. Their next trip is to Minneapolis, if I'm not mistaken, it may be in about 6 months or so, something to that effect. So that was one item I wanted to mention related to the Innovation Hub. We're on target to open those programs in fall of 2026. And Jeremy Qualls and his team are doing a really good job preparing for that. Certainly, we've talked about that in detail in the past, but if you all need some reminders on that, we can give those to you. Second piece I wanted to mention is the Alternative Learning Center. County government is going through what they call the Triple J project, juvenile, justice, and judiciary. And they actually have already gotten funding approval for the first steps of that project. And their first steps includes rebuilding or building a new juvenile justice center and addressing our alternative learning center. We are currently a guest in that building. They have gone through multiple iterations over the course of about, I'm going to estimate 5 years, trying to determine how are they going to do that. They have landed. They are taking an existing county building at 300 Beasley and creating an ALC in that building. I suspect they will use some of the impact fee funds to fund that, just based on the discussions that we've had recently, because we haven't had a new ALC in 30 years, maybe longer. As we've been guests there, and we needed that extra space. They have a really good plan. It will, if the plan is actually completed, give us some additional office space as well. So our projection is that we ought to be able to have our safety team in that building along with the ALC. So we'll share some additional details, but I wanted to let you know that because county government has approved funding for that. Brian, I don't know that they have do they have a timetable, a construction timetable for that? Is it too soon to mention a timetable, Eric? I see you smiling, so probably it's not wise to mention a construction timetable. Okay, so we're excited about that. That end is on the horizon. The address is 300 Beasley. There's a very solid building that we've actually examined. We had Eric. I know you went and reviewed it. Solid building, if I'm not mistaken, poured concrete walls. very stable building that the plan is for us to take over with some renovations to create that ALC. They're going to have a lot more space than they currently do.
Anything else for operations? Okay, I don't have a board chair report, so new business. First item is evaluation of the superintendent. Dana, are you handling this or someone else?
I can handle it. So, per Tennessee state law, the superintendent there must be an evaluation. You all have completed that evaluation per state law. During the board meeting on Monday, you will be voting to accept the evaluation results. In other words, when you are looking at what you turned in, your scores, those were correctly tabulated. That's your role Monday evening during the vote.
Sorry, go ahead.
Could you, rather ask you to do this than him, could you
Sure.
give us the recap of what the scores turned out to be in the aggregate?
Thanks. I didn't receive all the scores, so I am relying upon Lydia and Rachel Farmer, who actually did the compilation. So, that's my full thing. Okay. Performance goals, that was per the instrument that the board voted on for Superintendent Golden's evaluations. The performance goal number 1, the average was 3.00. Performance goal number 2 was 3.63. Performance goal number 3, 2.96, which made a total of 9.59, overall average of 3.2. And those performance goals were 80% of his total goals. Thank you. You're okay. Okay, and then pursuant to state law, there are certain characteristics that the board must evaluate when doing the superintendent's evaluation. Those include student achievement. That average was 4.17. Board relations, average 3.71. Community relations, 3.92. Staff and personnel relationships, 3.54. Facilities, finance, and human resources, 3.63, for a total of 18.97, with an overall average of 3.79. All of those, that 3.79 is the remaining 20% of the evaluation. And again, that was determined by the board what that weight would be. Is there a total?
So weighting those two, the 80% for the performance and 20% for demonstrable, the overall total was average was a 3.32.
All right, thank you for that. Mr. Golden, any response to that or feedback from you?
Yes, and thank you, board, for your feedback. Number one, I mentioned the thanks. I very much appreciate your comments related especially to the really good work we're doing with those demonstrable characteristics at that the state requires of us. I will tell you overall, Dana just shared those numbers. Those numbers matter, but I really study the comments. The comments really do me a lot more good. The constructive opportunities for our team. And it was interesting to me that some of your comments actually mirrored or paralleled some of the discussions we've had as a leadership team, especially related to those five focus points that the state has: student achievement, board relationships, community relationships, staff and personnel relationships, and facilities, finance, and human resources. Every year since I've been superintendent, I have talked to our leadership team, principals, and our teachers about our focus points for the year. So as an example, the first year, one of our focus points was don't go it alone. And one of the things I talked about was there's a lot of good people in this district, a lot of brain power, a lot of experience. Don't live in isolation. If there's something that's unusual to you, there's somebody who's been through it and we can help you. That's just one example, and that was 7 years ago actually by now. The three focus points that we've talked about and we've introduced to our principals that we're still going to be refining over the next 5 or 6 weeks before we start our new school year include instruction, safety, and relationships. And then our instructional focus that we're projecting for next year is growing students with unique learning needs. And I know that we had some comments related to that in our evaluation. We celebrate our student successes, but if you look at some of our raw numbers, some of our what the state calls subpopulations, the raw numbers can grow, and we know that. Compared to other folks in the state, comparatively, we do really well, but that's a focus point for us instructionally this coming year. Second, on safety, I've told the principals we're going to have a focus on safety every single year, and some of you all have heard me speak to public groups that will never stop asking for help with safety. We'll never stop investing in safety because it is that important. And what we're looking at right now, still to be refined, is building student relationships as the foundation of safety. And that's going to be a focus point for us this coming year. And then when we talked about proactive engagement is our third, with parent, staff, and stakeholder engagement in student-centered decisions. And we've talked about a focus in getting parents involved, getting staff involved in that. And again, some of you may notice that you made some comments related to that in your evaluation. So I very much thank you all for that. So that's kind of the chunk that's the state level and some of our focus points. I do want to speak to those annual goals that you set, Mr. Chair. As you mentioned, we started that annual goal in November. And as I reflected on how we approach those goals, I think we've got room to grow too, especially in communication. This year, more than most of the years I've been superintendent, the majority of those goals were goals that really just couldn't be completed in a year. The one that could was setting a pay plan based on the available funds. But the others are items that we're still working on. The bullying process, it needs ongoing attention, and as you know, we're not done. As an example, Ms. Hall has had that first meeting. She's gathered the end of year data. I know you're looking at it and double checking. If I'm not mistaken, you're projected to have that finished on June 23rd. We had this conversation that week, the week of June 23rd. And that's actually in keeping with what we've done these last few years, where we gather up that data, and we're going to let that data drive some changes. You all may not remember this, but we made some changes last year as a result of some of our discussions, creating some consistency in our discipline. And this year, we had some pushback from some of our families related to that consistency. And so that team is looking at that. And one key point that I asked them to specifically look at in that context is, have we set particular minimum discipline consequences for students that don't in any way take into account variations for students? And if that's the case, if a principal or an assistant principal believes there needs to be some variation, I'm going to use my old line: don't go it alone. Bring that to your administrator. Share that. If there's a reason why you need to make an adjustment for a student, let's have that conversation about that individual student. That's one example of something that I've asked them to work on. And then the other one, the annual goal, seek alternative funding methods. We've set structures in place for that, but it's going to have to be an ongoing effort. I know Mr. Galbraith and I have had some discussions about, and you guys heard a couple of months ago, if I'm not mistaken, discussion of some advice committees from our athletics boosters. Have some detailed discussions related to that. Are there some corporate donations that over time we might be able to hit without negatively impacting the excellent work our boosters and PTOs have been doing? So I tell you that to tell you that, number one, I appreciate your feedback about how we've communicated that and our timelines, because I don't think I did a good job of sharing with you that timeline over the course of our work. And number two, I haven't set those goals aside just because we've reached the end of the year. Those are some items that we need to continue to work on. The third piece is an ask I have of you. I'd like us, to the chair's point, have some discussions about trying to set those goals a little bit earlier in the school year. And I will commit to you that I will communicate more often about those goals. With that, again, thank you so much for praising the work of our teachers and the work of our principals so often in my evaluation, because it is personal. You can't help but it being personal, but it's really about our team as well. So I very much appreciate that.
Thank you for that. Any feedback from the board on the process or the evaluations themselves, or what we'll be doing on Monday? All right. I don't see any. Okay, we will move on to 25-26 budget status update, which we may have already heard. But is there anything more to add to that?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, we're going to stick with you, Rachel. 2024-25 school board budget. So these are items for the current budget, what's remaining of it. I'll just, as usual, let you run through those item by item, and if there's questions from anyone, just jump in.
Thank you for that. The first two items are going to be related to summer school, which is occurring right now, but the way it works, the state grants gives you an allocation of funding, and then we actually expend it ourselves and then submit reimbursement. And so what you're seeing before you is what was the allocation from the state. So we do have to go ahead and put it into the budget, both the revenue and expense, but we will not necessarily spend all of this. It's just what our allocation was. So the first one is related to the actual camp itself, and the allocation was in total $4,400,725. Got no questions on that one. The next one is
Mr. Chair, if I
sorry.
may, I'm at the risk of extending this too long, I do want to speak to the summer learning camps, which is the summer school. It's a K-8 summer school. We have about 1,650 students in it right now. I actually received an email today from someone from the Tennessee Department of Education who visited, in part maybe to check on us in the summer school program. And it was some hefty praise we received from that state rep. Laura LaChance, one of our executive directors for elementary schools, I know you're deeply involved in that. She visited Walnut Grove and was very impressed with what she saw. It's a valuable program. It is 100% funded by the state, so the finance item hits that. I will say also, if I'm not mistaken, Rachel, the state actually gives us the opportunity for funding more than we actually need on that item. Am I correct about that?
We got the same allocation as we did last year, and just as a reference point, we spent a little over $2 million last year on the summer camps. And so the allocation was $4.4 million. And again, we'll submit reimbursement when it's over with and see what that total is, but that's correct.
So we can do up to $4.4 million, but it's not going to cost us anywhere near that, which means that money will remain in the state budget. No, you were correct, Dr. Johnson. They do not give it to us.
The second item is, again, related to summer camps, but it's specifically the transportation piece, and the total for that is $798,171. No questions on that. We'll move on to our next, which was a donation from Gibson Gives, which is Gibson Guitars, to the Fine Arts Department, specifically to be used on instruments and equipment, and that contribution was $49,410. Happy at any time to accept those donations. The next one is also a fine arts donation, and it was from a family. Go ahead.
Can I stop you real
Sure.
quick? Ms. Clements has a question on the phone about summer camps.
Hey, everybody. Real quick, so I know last year we didn't always, and I brought this up with the state delegation, but we didn't always have an SRO at our summer camps. Will the state make sure that they cover that?
Brian, can you speak to that?
Yes, sir. So that's not really a funding issue as much as it is a lot of our SROs are off in the summer. They build up their time. The other thing is, and Mark, they do a lot of training in the summer with different deputies. So typically in the summer, it may not be an assigned SRO per school. It may rotate. They'll have somebody different on different days. It may be in an area. They may check in but not stay there all day. So we try to do as much as we can for these 3 weeks. But it is a little bit different than it is during the school year.
So Brian, in a nutshell,
Okay,
I think what you're saying is the sheriff's office does commit to having somebody there, but it may not be the same person every day.
It may not be the same person, and it may not be the entire day. There's some, they may
Okay.
go to one school for part of the day and another school for another, that kind of thing. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. The next item, I don't know that I finished saying that, but the Dunaway family is someone who has given a donation also to Fine Arts, and that is for $1,000. No questions on it. We will move on to TCAT, which is the Tennessee College of Applied Technology. They work with us in providing some additional funds for teachers that are working alongside and teaching the classes that benefit our students that are taking courses at TCAT, to help train additional teachers to work in this area. So the allocation from them is $5,737.23 to be used for stipends for that training. The Central Cafeteria Fund also has, this is an annual year-end item that comes through. It's a revenue and expense, so it's neutral. It is to tie that back to the exact number that came through USDA commodities, and they received that number from the USDA in the beginning of June, late May. And so then we bring it back to you just to make the budget align with what they've actually given us this year. And so that adjustment is $570,286.12. And they give us the initial amount as Mr. Rometty went through the budget this year and this adjustment. They are provided that amount to start with, and then they'll come back and make the adjustment. Those are our amendments, and then we have intra-category transfers. So this is something I've kind of said, but I want to be clear. If within a major category, if we have items where we see you may have one line a little over or less, hybrid, we may need to move from one form of a pension to another, or different things like that if it's in a major category. We do transfers, but then we bring them all to you at the end of the year. If it's between major categories, we bring those back to you and you vote on those throughout the year. So you will have 3 votes on Monday night with a listing of each one for 141, which is general purpose, for the central cafeteria 143, and for extended school care, these transfers. And so again, those will be, or they're in the packet, and you can go through and see what the transfers look like. And if y'all have questions about any of those, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll get you the detail.
Do you have a feel for, as far as tax collections and our purchasing freeze that we always do, and empty positions, as far as where we look in relation to what our fund balance will be compared to what we thought it was going to be?
That's a great question, and I will say we're right in line with where I was projecting earlier. We tried to get it done today so I could have a number for you to project out the rest of the payroll through August because we pay out over 24 pays for our teachers. And so we do one big accrual. We did not get that finished today, so hopefully tomorrow we will be able to finish that up. We also will cut off 100% of purchase orders being issued tomorrow. It's still open for emergencies right now. So really after tomorrow, this weekend, I'll be able to work and have a better number. But it is pretty much in line with whenever I came in March and where we were projecting, it's pretty close.
You're always conservative, so I know you.
I am conservative. That's not a bad thing.
No,
But it is in line. We
Okay.
are.
Thanks.
So again, you'll have those 3 votes on Monday night for each one of those. And then the last thing I have for you is, it is one of those housekeeping items where you all have voted already on the capital, our annual capital. You did that through the budget process. Just like the budget committee was meeting tonight, they go through the budget process and approve those. But in order for it to come before the full commission, it has to be in resolution form. So you will get the resolution form. It's the numbers you've already voted on and approved, as has the budget committee. But it just has to be in resolution. And they bring all of their capital, ours plus theirs, in the month of July. We don't meet in the month of July, so I'm bringing it to you now in June so that they'll have it to vote on in the month of July. And that total, just as a reminder to everybody, was $14,135,800. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions for Rachel on any of those items? Before we move on to D, I'm going to go back to Jason on one item related to the evaluation that I think is worth him pointing out relative to a different approach this year to his contract compared to previous years. So I'll let him walk through that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I failed to mention this. We do have on the annual agenda vote on my contract, on the renewal of my contract, and the maximum allowable term for a superintendent in a contract is 4 years. And traditionally, we've had that annual vote every year. The board, when they hired me a little over 6 years ago, started me at a 4-year contract, and every year there's been a vote. And I'm of the opinion that with half of our board having worked with me for 9 months, that asking for an annual extension from 3 to 4 years now is premature. And so I'm actually not asking for an extension from 3 to 4 years now. I do intend to ask for that later, after we've had a chance to continue to grow in our relationship and spend some more time working. But I want to mention that my contract actually extends currently through 2028, and I don't plan to go anywhere. And so I didn't see a significant difference between June of 28 and June of 29, and so felt like it was not appropriate for me to ask you all this year to extend that from 3 to 4. But I do anticipate that we'll have that discussion later on this year.
Thanks for that. So I thought it was important to bring that up because he and I have discussed it, but also routinely, for those of us who've been on the board, that vote accompanies the evaluation vote. And so we wouldn't be doing that Monday night. And so in case that question came up, I wanted him to provide that context. And I'm not going to ask him to do that again Monday night, but for the benefit of all of us, I wanted him to share that. So any thoughts or feedback on that before we keep going? Okay. Item D, approval of differentiated pay. Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For a few years now, I'm thinking maybe a decade or so, the state of Tennessee has had us do an annual report on differentiated pay. Vicki Hall has included the detail of that differentiation for you. A lot of it is related to signing bonuses and hiring bonuses for hard-to-fill areas. So as an example, our special education teachers get some additional funding. You can see that our total cost right now for differentiated pay is $1.225 million. I do want to let you know, and I know Dr. Reeves and I had a brief email discussion related to this. There's actually a new law in Tennessee that specifically allows for pay related to test scores and performance. We're not there yet. We see some research out there. But I felt like it was important for you to know that law's out there, and that we do not have any recommendations related to that. We do see that from place to place, there's some discussion about that. With that new law, I'm curious to see whether those kinds of discussions start happening more often in Tennessee. We have seen some good and bad out of that in what we've seen, and there's some research on both sides of that. But I just felt like it was worth mentioning that there is a new state law related to that. Certainly open any questions you may have, and Ms. Hall may be able to speak to some of the questions you might have related to our detail as well.
Jason, what does that law actually say about performance-based compensation?
It's very short, and it basically, as I understand it, just opens the door for the possibility. And it doesn't give any more detail. If I'm not mistaken, Dana, it may be something like 7 or 8 total lines, if that.
I can't remember that specific detail, but yes, it is short, and I'll send it to y'all so you can see what it is, see what it says.
It was also addressed in state board policy that predates that, where we could, in fact, have an alternative pay schedule. It is something we have to work on, and it's kind of defined by a pay chart that deviates from the basic state chart. So we would have to define like how we were going to measure the performance. We wouldn't give automatic roles for experience and education. It's that type of thing, and it does require state board approval.
So, I guess I've talked to you over the years about the possibility of having some discretionary amount of our raise pool, if you will, to give in the form of bonuses and discretionary at the principal level, to be able to provide bonuses. I wasn't necessarily thinking that it would be directly related to test scores necessarily, but in a way for principals to basically incentivize and to reward whatever teachers they felt or it could be classified employees as well, but people that they thought did an exemplary job, and it would be in the form of it wouldn't be changing the pay scale, it would be a bonus. Would that be part of this differentiated? Would we have to report that here as far as differentiated pay?
So we would, and part of how we have addressed that is those teachers who excel, or some of those that receive those instructional or those leadership supplements that we talk about during supplements, where we list those out, those academic ones, and so they're tied in to the differentiated pay plan.
But they're kind of doing. I mean, they are doing more work. I mean, they're given more responsibility for that additional pay.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I'm just thinking maybe as we think about next year. I'm certainly not trying to do anything for this one, but as we think about the future, I'd love to see, some percentage, maybe some growing percentage that's allocated to that. I just think it would go. I get that we don't want to put tons of money there because it'd be a really big shift away from everybody, getting the same percentage. But in some cases, you want your best people to feel like they're seen and they can be incentivized. So
we'll make sure that we talk to the WCA leadership about that through the PECA process. And I see what you're saying. There are probably some models out there that would be worth reviewing to see where there could be some value there.
Is this like achievement or growth, or is that just way too far down the line to?
Well, as I understand it, the potential is there for both.
Okay.
And I will tell you, professionally, I'm leery of it. My first question is, in that context, what problem are we trying to solve, and what are the tools to solve it? So for us to do something like that, for me as a leader, I'd want to have a lot of discussions before we went down that road, because I've seen it go bad in some places.
Okay. Thank you.
This may be in there somewhere and I'm not seeing it, but on these early signing bonuses and hiring bonuses, is there a length of time that the teacher has to stay in the role in order to retain that? Or can it be clawed back if they leave early?
The early contract bonus is paid the first month, so we are taking a risk.
Okay.
The $1,000, we do pay it in halves. We pay the first 500 the first semester, and then the second 500. I mean, the first semester, and then the second 500 the second. And to give you a little explanation why we do that is because we are recruiting those new teachers who are out, and often there are moving expenses and like putting down a deposit on a department, and frankly, just competition in the market. Our biggest competitors are offering a similar type of signing bonus for those hard-to-fill positions.
And if I may add a little bit, we worry about those first-year teachers in their first paycheck. That can be a big issue. They're finishing college, and because of the pay structure, they're getting their first paycheck halfway through their first month of work. And so especially for those new ones, we feel like it's a difference maker to get them some cash on the front end.
So, have we heard any more, I guess, I don't know if we talked about it the last couple of months, but about the bonus for teachers that was part of the bill?
So I'll give you, oh, sorry, you go ahead.
That's okay. We've been working on it. We've had to go through the list because you'd think it wouldn't be complicated, but we have to sort out like what teachers are actually teachers as are defined in the law that get the bonus. So to answer your question, yes, my department and Rachel's department have been working on that, and we have to have, I think they'll get our final list to us June 15th.
That's when they pull it over. It'll be the 16th, so it normally takes a couple days after that.
So yes, we
So
are.
what will they be notified, and do you know who is, outside of having an eligible teaching position, do they have to continue to be employees for next year, or is it just?
They actually don't.
Okay.
They could have left here even. They had to have worked 120 days. And if they've worked 120 days for WCS last year, full-time, we'll send it, we owe them the $2,000.
Okay.
So logistically, that state will give us the list that they've interpreted is the right people based on their definition out of our electronic system. And Rachel, will we have time to review that? And we'll have time to review that and potentially appeal, depending on our data. They will actually give us the funding for it in July, which means we will actually have to do a budget amendment in July because we don't know how much we're actually going to get. And then we will pay that out directly to those employees, some of whom have actually retired. Rachel?
I was gonna say, we'll have to respond, we have to have the information back to them by June 30th so that they can pay it. So we'll have 2 weeks essentially to be able to verify. And then, as Mr. Golden said, that our goal would be to pay out at the end of August 15th, the end of August, because then we have to wait and make sure the money comes in, and then we'll turn around. And again, what you said, it could be retirees, or it could also be people that have left the district and gone to another.
But do we have to get a budget amendment before we pay it out?
Rachel.
Not technically.
Okay.
We will bring a budget amendment because we need to put it into the budget, but because it is a flow through, it's not our taxpayer
So we can
dollars.
just do it in August?
This is sort of in the weeds, but are these bonus numbers gross numbers or net numbers?
2,000 gross.
It's gross, and so they will have deductions that come out of that.
And if I'm not mistaken, the state has told us they actually intend to fund the total amount of FICA and Medicare.
FICA and the retirement portion.
Yeah.
So we should not be out of pocket for either.
Okay, anything else on the pay plan? All right, item E, board policies for first and final reading. We've got 3 of those. First one is 4.700 testing programs. I don't know, Jay or Dana, how you want to handle this, coming out of policy committee, but these are, as a reminder, first and final, so these will get one, for now, one discussion, one vote.
I can take the first two at least. Those are legal compliance. You may remember that last month we changed board policy 4.7001 to allow for end of course. Thank you. I couldn't think of what that word was. And that those would be calculated at 15%. So we have two additional policies. When that was approved, we also need to update policy 4.700, testing programs. That change is on page 2, stating the 15% for the second semester. Then we've got the TCAP grades in 6 through 8. We are currently calculating those at 10%. We would like to continue that. And student scores for TCAP grades 3 through 5 should not be used for student grades. Again, this is the weighting that we are currently doing, but we do need to update this policy first and final reading. Do you want me to go ahead to middle school?
Let's see if there are any questions on that one before we do that. Okay, go ahead, Dana.
So similarly with 4.7002, middle school examinations, we found that that particular policy had elementary in there, so we would like to delete that. And go ahead and delete the other information about middle school examinations so that it is in one, all three are listed in one policy. So that is the reason for that recommended middle school examinations change. So we are consistent with board policy 4.7001. So both of those would be before you for first and final editorial and legal compliance changes.
Any questions on that one? All right, then the third one is 6.312, which is a new policy on wireless communications.
Okay, so board members, as you may recall, there's a use of wireless communications, a law that passed, and the board needs to adopt a policy. Law becomes effective on July 1 of 2025. So what you will see, I'm going to talk about first what you see and then some proposed changes that I've received from a couple different board members. So initially, in blue, we added in red from the policy meeting, students in grades K through 8 may possess a wireless communication device so long as such devices are turned off and stored. The law requires students may possess a wireless communication device if but they cannot be used during instructional time. So there was some discussion to change turned off and stored, that they could possess it, but they could not use during instructional time. Policy that grades K through 8, and it was changed to during the school day. So for high school, students in grades 9 through 12, still the same, that they could possess it as long as it is turned off and stored during the school day. Students in grades 9 through 12 may use that device during the student's lunch period. There was additionally discussion at policy about the students being allowed to use a communication device during transition times. that is not spelled out in the policy. And the reason that students' lunch period is that in most, if not all of our high schools, students have the opportunity during that lunch period for maybe RTI, maybe to go to a teacher to get additional help. It is not mandatory, but they have that opportunity. So we wanted to make it clear that during that lunch period, regardless of the activity, they can use their phone. Dr. Webb received information and feedback from middle school and high school principals about these changes, and when I'm done, I'm sure y'all will want to hear that. They had some good feedback. Let me see what else. The only other change, again, penalties change the duration of instructional time to the school day. Was at the bottom, the emergency communication plan. That is an edit that staff is recommending so that it is clear that a parent or guardian might be alerted by a text message and or an email and or a phone call. Didn't want parents to think they would get a text message and it was comma email. So that's just for clarification purposes. I know there have been some additional proposed changes in addition to what is on the screen, and I will close with this. What's in blue is what the law requires us to have it as a minimum. It's the floor. I mean, it's the ceiling of what's required. So I'd be comfortable with a first and final. If it's the will of the board to make numerous changes, my recommendation would be we're not just at a legal compliance piece. We would need to do 2 readings. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there so you are aware. I know, like I said, Dr. Webb has some information from principals.
If I may, before Dr. Webb speaks, Dana, just as a small point of clarification, you said that the blue is what the law requires. The turned off language at the end of the first line, I know that reflects the TSBA's recommended language and your recommended language. But if I'm not mistaken, the turned off is not specifically in the law?
Correct. Okay. What the law says is that they may possess such items, they may not use such items during instructional time. So if I don't have any issue, if the board wants to change that language to, instead of turned off and stored, to they cannot use a wireless communication device.
How are we defining school day? Like, is that bell to bell? Is that while they're on the premises, like certain amount of hours?
So in other policies, we have defined it as our 7 point, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? 7 point whatever is how we have defined school day. That would be the same. So if they're there early for or after for extracurriculars, would not apply. That's a great question. Correct.
So, yes, we define school day as the moment that first bell rings until that last bell rings.
Gotcha.
Sorry, I interrupted. I know you tried to call on Dr. Webb to give some detail.
All right.
Thank you. So I'm happy to share some additional feedback. I reached out to our secondary school principals just to collect their feedback since our policy conversation at the policy meeting. As I anticipated with our middle school principals, this policy matches our current practice. Middle school students put away their cell phones currently when the school day begins, and they access them at the end of the day. There's no access to those phones during the day. We also collected some feedback about recess. I know recess came up about middle school. Our middle school students don't have access to their cell phones or their Chromebooks during recess. Or during our physical activity time. I would say the only exception could be if it's raining or storming and maybe a teacher's leading something on their screen in their classroom as a supplemental activity. There could be that screen that's utilized, the teacher's screen, but not individual devices typically. As far as high school is concerned, it was some really great feedback that I received. Specifically, some principals shared just the change and transition over the years in study hall. You know, typically you would walk by a study hall class. If you're walking down the hall, you could kind of recognize which classroom has an active high school study hall and which class is an academic class by the tone and demeanor of the classroom. And the feedback I received from them that's kind of shifted over the last few years, that the study halls now are as quiet as the academic classes because the students are on a screen. Right? They may be on their cell phone, they may be listening to music on their iPad or their iPhone, etc. And so I've received some feedback of it's caused them to pause, building leaders, about what's really taking place in those study hall classes. Are they on a screen engaging on their Chromebook, or are they perhaps engaging on their cell phones in a non-academic way? So some good feedback that we received. Ultimately, at the high school level, collectively we support the non-use of cell phones during instruction time and the non-use of cell phones during study hall. We feel like that would be a positive change and transition and easy to manage. So we support that. And again, it was great conversation that we hadn't had previously in regards to the study hall period, so I was thankful for that conversation at the policy meeting. Lunchtime is a little bit more difficult to manage. We do have older students, and our conversations have been, is that a proper time to teach students the proper use of technology, right? So a lot of our students have jobs, after-school activities, they're communicating. That's a proper time during your lunch to check in, to see if you've got some missed messages perhaps about your work, or communicate however you need to, and then shut it off and go back to work. So our conversations have been not only about, is that an appropriate use for a high school student? Maybe so. But also teaching the limitation of when you get back to business, it's time to get back to business and put your technology away. Management during lunch also becomes difficult at the high school level because students are at a lot of different places. And so we did have some conversations about how would we manage that. We would need some more conversation about how we would manage that if we were enforcing that. And anytime that we have a rule or an expectation, we want to make sure we have a good enforcement plan, and we would need to spend more time talking about the lunchtime supervision piece of it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but we need more time to kind of plan for that and communicate around that if that ends up being where we head. Class changes also are a little bit more difficult to manage and police just because kids are in transition, right? They're in and out of the restroom, they're headed down the hall. Teachers are moving from class to class. Supervision is there, but it's less focused on individual students. But as far as the high school piece, we're all in on the academic periods, which a lot of our schools are already working on and already have their plans for the upcoming school year, and we're all in on study halls not having access. I'm happy to answer any additional questions, but it's been a really great conversation, I will say, over the last several months on this topic.
Okay. Jay, do you want to add anything from the policy committee's perspective? Or I know you had emailed today some suggested changes that you were going to bring up, so you want to do that now, or you want to wait?
Yeah, I guess not really fair to, I mean, my comments were more related to my personal opinion versus the policies, to be fair. So so no, we can just have a discussion. I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay. All right, let's open it up for comments.
Yeah, Dr. Webb, you didn't mention recess time for the high school. Is that going to be a time for, well, at any grade level, are they going to be allowed to bring their cell phones outside? Because that's defeating the purpose of some physical training or whatever.
That's a good point. Our physical activity time looks different in each high school, and so we're streamlining, in the process of streamlining those activities at this time. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about the cell phone use during that time. In most of our high schools, there are options. You know, there are options of physical activity, go see a teacher, as Ms. Osbrooks mentioned. There are different options that students can partake in, sit and socialize with your friends. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about the cell phone access during that time. We would just need a pretty structured supervision plan if that were going to be an enforcement period for us. It's not impossible, but we just need more conversation surrounding it.
And Mr. Cash, if I may, in our student wellness policy that we'll get to this evening, the law changed that states no use of electronics during elementary PE or recess, the unstructured play, not PE, unstructured play. It is silent for middle and high school, the law change. So it is included, the cell phone provision during elementary is included in the student wellness policy. We'll talk about it a little bit later tonight.
Well, the whole purpose of this and creating a state law is to possibly help students communicate eye to eye rather than sit on these phones.
That's right.
I mean, it's epidemic. An example, I was dropping my grandson off and I pulled out into the bus lane, and there's a young man walked right into the front of my truck. I cracked up. I laughed. It shocked him. I should have blew the horn, but I didn't. But, I mean, it's that bad. And I think that the purpose of the state law is to get kids to start communicating eye to eye, having a conversation eye to eye, and it makes a big difference. Lunchtime, that's a great time to get the phones out and start gossiping and sending somebody home with hurt feelings and another bullying situation. And so my personal opinion, like Jay said, this is my personal opinion. No phones at lunch, no phones at the break time for a little bit of exercise, maybe walking or maybe a little volleyball game or a soccer game or something. That's the purpose, especially for little kids, is to move and burn energy.
That's right.
So I think, you know, I commend the principals because they're going to have to deal with this. But at the same time, at some period of time, we have to get after the elementary students and break them of the habit before it gets started.
That's fair. And so just for clarity, at the elementary and the middle, no access from the beginning period of the day until the closing period of the day. And those other auxiliary periods that you mentioned for high school, I'm not saying that those are impossible managerial situations. They just present their own challenges with the flexibility of where kids are and what the supervision looks like. We simply just need more time to plan what the most effective way to manage that use would look like in a looser supervised area with that many students. You're talking about, you know, in most of our schools around 1,600 students all at the same time. Out and around the building with our supervision. We'll just have to plan for that if that's the board's decision.
I have a follow-up question for you, Dr. Webb.
Yes, ma'am.
Just with the principal feedback and noticing the difference between study halls and academic classes, what was their perception of that? Were they concerned about that?
They were concerned about it. Yeah. And a lot of the buildings, they are already having conversations about it ahead of this policy. Since we had transitioned the academic classes to their phones being away, many of our schools already had a practice similar to that already. And so, yeah, it was concerning. And so it was a good feedback session. It was good feedback, and I think that we're going to continue to have more conversations about more ways to restrict and more ways to build community. We're also having, at a parallel time, outside of this policy, conversations about how to build community and how to teach students to build community. We see more than ever that's a challenge for students, communicating face-to-face, looking someone in the eye and having a direct communication versus head down into a device. So we're also at the same time talking about how we build community with our students and giving them the opportunity through the leadership of an adult who is overseeing a small group of students, helping them build community face-to-face with each other. So all those pieces are have been things that those two pieces, especially the community building, has been something that we've been working on for quite some time. We consider the community aspect of building community with kids part of our safety plan. Right? Students feel safe when they feel connected. They feel safe when they know that there's an adult who they can trust, who they built community with, students who they built community with that they can talk to if there's something that's bothering them, or go and confide in if there's something going that feels unsafe around them.
Technically speaking, do you consider, or do we consider instructional time to include the study hall period or not?
So for the purpose of this policy, we would. I think on a typical basis, I wouldn't consider a study hall instructional time, but for the implementation of this policy, we support considering study hall as an academic class. I would think that outside of our conversation now, most people would consider study hall not instructional time, but for the sake of this policy, we would support considering one and the same.
So if we were to use the terms instructional time, which right now have been stricken, but if we were to use those terms, it would capture study hall.
I think that for someone who's reading that outside of this conversation, I would think that that's only academic classes, which is not a study hall. So my feedback for you all would be, if your intent is for it for students not to have their cell phone devices out during study hall, that we specify that, or specify in the policy the only time that students are allowed K-12 to access their cell phones. I think if I'm a teacher or I'm a principal reading it, if it only said instructional time, my deferral would be only those academic periods, not study hall. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
So thinking through this, one of the things is with the wearable technology, I'm thinking earbuds and listening to music, and obviously it's not something we want them doing while they're getting a history lecture or a math instruction, but I can see a lot of scenarios where it would be okay. You use the one of study hall, you know, being able to sort of lock in and focus, but also a weights class, an art class that you're working on a project, CAD, a lot of other scenarios. Would it be, that was loud, would this restrict that, or would it be able to fall under authorized by a teacher for educational purposes if they're using it for sort of that? I guess the question is, what is the flexibility there?
I would leave it to you all in the wording, but how I would interpret it is that if this were implemented during study hall, I wouldn't listen to my music. Because that's connected to my connected to my cell phone. I'm a music lady. I listen to music when I'm working. I confess that 7 a.m. one day this week, Mr. Golden came in and I had to turn my music down. No one else was in the office. So I know that some students work better with a little music in the background, and I've been in study halls before where the teacher has had some music playing in the background while students are working. But how I read this policy is that those devices, and maybe it's my interpretation, is that those devices would not be utilized during study hall.
If I may, I'm going to give an answer that's slightly different based on Dana, the technicality of this law. The law is written, I'm going to use a word peculiarly in that. And I know you had a little facial reaction, Dana, but this, because the law says each local Board of Ed shall adopt and implement a wireless communication device policy that, except as provided in B2 through 4, 3 examples, except as that prohibits a student from using a wireless communication device during instructional time. One of the exceptions is the policy must authorize a teacher to allow a student to use a wireless communication device for educational purposes during instructional time. In other words, the teachers are the decision makers, the way this law reads. So if we are determining that study hall is instructional time, then we have to give the teachers that authority.
Well, I think
Did I describe that well?
So,
Yes, so, I mean, so to Eric's point, that is, in my mind, within teachers' discretion. If I am an art teacher and part of the lesson is, while listening to music, you create XYZ, then the teacher has that discretion. That's just the first example I came up with. Yes, it is not for us, I don't think, to come up with all of the scenarios in which a teacher could authorize, but that is an exception, just like if it is documented in a student's IEP, that the student needs read aloud, the student needs to record. All of those are exceptions. So it's going, even though, and also I'm also going to point out the healthcare plan we talked about. We do have students who use their phone to monitor and check for if they're diabetic. That is an exception. That check could occur during the instructional time if it is documented in their individual healthcare plan. So while it is there are definitely exceptions that will occur during the school day, if that's how you wish to define it, or during the instructional time.
so going back to kind of my original question with this then, and I realize this is the tail wagging the dog, but in that scenario where students working in drafting class and is drawing out their kitchen and the circuits and what have you, and they're locked in and focused, is there that flexibility within that? Then they can say that the student can ask for permission, receive it if the teacher wants to give to them and say, hey, can I put my earbuds in? Can I some music? Can I lock in and block out the noise and just work on this because that's what I'm doing in those scenarios? Does that qualify as an educational purpose, something like that? Is that flexibility in there? And I don't know if that's just the scenario, but there's other things that
No,
we're
but
not gonna think of.
that's a good way to put the question. And Dr. Webb, I'd like you to speak to that, especially in the high school level, at the high school level.
That's definitely a scenario that happens,
Yeah.
where students listen to music as they're,
Absolutely.
in CAD class. It sounds like maybe you're speaking from your own children's experience. I think I've walked in and seen your children listening to their music while they're in CAD class. I think that is definitely something that students are going to request to do. And so my recommendation would be, if that's something that the board intends to allow, that we specify that in some way. Because if I'm reading this as a teacher,
Right.
I'm not necessarily associating that authorized for educational purposes listening to my music. I'm not making that direct correlation there.
I don't know that I would either, and so
Mhm.
that's why I wonder is
Yeah.
the language, which there's the letter of the law and then there's the spirit of the law, which I think the spirit of the law we're all on board with, but the letter of the law, I don't know if I wonder if it's too restrictive, the way it's worded, and I don't have a solution for it. I'm just bringing up potential problems.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've thought a lot about, and some of this is speaking to it, is that the further we get into this conversation, the further away we get from the letter of the law, what we're actually required to do in our policy by July 1, the more complicated this gets. And it's one of the reasons why my inclination personally is that we adopt this policy that we have to adopt per the law by July 1, and then give ourselves the ability to come back in the future, not the distant future, but the near future, and revise it, and partly based on some of these nuances, but partly based on the fact that we have a technology committee that we created, that each of us got to appoint somebody to serve on, and parents who we wanted, by doing that, to have input into this process. And I just strongly feel like we need to let that committee at least have a chance to do some work and put some thought into this and give us some feedback, even if we may know 99% of what we may think we know 99% of what's going to come out of that process. I think in fairness to that process, it gives them a chance to give that input, and it gives us more time to think about some of these details that are clearly not as clear as we'd like them to be. So the urgency of the law is putting pressure on us to get something on paper and voted on and in policy, but we're not really required to go beyond that. So that's why I'm a little hesitant to do much more than what the law requires us to do, personally. But I know there's different feelings about that, so we should discuss it.
So for me, I guess something that Dr. Webb said, so you said that policing during lunch would be an issue, but how is policing at high school during lunch different than middle school?
That's a great question. And in many of our high schools, the flexibility of where students are is more vast. In middle school, it's more structured. Students are in the cafeteria. They're sitting at tables. It's a really structured lunch environment. At the high school level, most of our high schools give students the flexibility and be in multiple areas. If they want to sit with their friends in the hallway, they're spread out. Supervision is more spread out. It's just as students get older, the structure of that time is less structured.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But I guess to me, one thing that Josh said that I don't necessarily disagree with is that if we did make this, and my recommendation is to make this K-12 for the school day. But from my perspective, it's actually easier and more consistent if the phones just don't come out during the day. Like it's not hard. I mean, I get, yes, if kids are in unpredictable places and there's not real supervision, I mean, that's just the definition of high school more so than middle school, where kids are more in more places throughout the school day, not just during lunch. But if the expectation is you don't have your phone out, then wherever you are, if you have your phone out, then I mean it's not going to be terribly hard to see. And so I just think that there's no good academic reason why we would leave phones at lunch. The reason is only, as best I could see it, as a stopgap or to provide some time to manage from a change management process. But in my opinion, that actually elongates the inevitable, and it makes us focus more on phones than I think we want to do in the future. And my recommendation for the technology committee would be, between now and the start of school, help staff be a sounding board for these issues that we know that we know are going to come up. And if they don't come up from us being identify them, then our parent and teacher representatives on the committee will be pretty reflective of the community as a whole, and will raise issues like Eric raised or like Grayson raised about turning the phone off. And so I guess I'd like to break these things down into a couple of different potential changes. But the first one is to Jason's point and to Drayson's, in terms of tracking and being able to see the phone, is I'd like to I'd like to go back to the state recommended or the state law language, and it would just be, so as long as such devices are not used during the school day. I just think that turning them off is gonna avoid, or not putting the turned off language is gonna avoid but is gonna address some concerns that are gonna come up, and so.
I got lost.
What's that?
I got lost. You want to change it back?
I want to change it. Well, I want to change it to not used instead of turned off and stored.
Not used. Okay.
Not used in silence?
I just not used during the day, right? So instead of, like, this one says turned off and stored. So forget K8 through K12 for a minute, but just the language for K8. Instead of saying turned off and stored, just such devices are not used during the school day.
If I may, I know Mr. Beasley's listening. One of the things he mentioned was at the elementary level, parents using some apps to know where their children are. That was the issue he raised that you referenced. And if the device is off, some of those apps aren't working. Maybe all of them. I don't know that off the top of my head. Just for clarity's purposes, that was that distinction that you mentioned.
But for that point, I would think using language that says turned off and not used makes it maybe more likely that the kids grab them and use them than if they were turned off. But except for that point, which is a valid point.
So, to your point about the committee, Mr. Chair, I think that all of the data supports pretty strongly an away for the day policy, and I think Dr. Allen referenced that in our policy committee. It is a no-brainer, and if you don't mind, I'd like to share a quote from an MIT professor, Sherry Turkle, and in her book, Reclaiming Conversation, because of our phones, she writes, "We are forever elsewhere. If we want children to be present, learn well, make friends, and feel like they belong at school, we should keep smartphones and social media out of the school day for as long as possible." So I strongly agree with that sentiment, and I think where the committee could have a role is in the implementation and the refinement of the policy. Jonathan Haidt, in his book Anxious Generation, highlights two very obvious things, and Mr. Cash highlighted them earlier, and one is giving kids more free play. At high school, that means more socialization time. And two is putting the phones away, a bell-to-bell policy. So that's where I am on it. I think that delaying it it's delaying the inevitable. And I think the committee can have a role in refining implementation, and then, of course, addressing the other technology use issues that we are interested in evaluating.
Oh, go ahead, Tanya.
I agree with Dr. Reeves, and I also just want to add that with Dr. Webb's comments about the communication with the high school students is a big issue, and I do think that, Dr. Reeves' opinion is what solves that, and that's what we have to get our community to understand, that that's truly the way to get this accomplished, and to work on just restoring relationships and communication and feeling community, because that also, like you stated, is a safety issue as well when kids feel isolated and lonely. And it's what solves the problem. Well, it doesn't solve the problem, but it decreases the problem of anxiety and depression. And so those are my comments. Thanks.
I think, obviously going bell to bell is a pretty decisive move and pretty final ultimate move, which is one we may get to anyway eventually in this process. I'm wondering, thinking about what you said about the implementation, leveraging the committee to talk about implementation, what are the things that, what does anyone think, I guess, about this as far as what are the aspects of implementation beyond us setting the parameters of bell to bell that they could possibly be weighing in on. Because I'm just really sensitive, as I said before, about not making an ultimate decision that renders the committee kind of useless. So I want them to be effective and bring value.
Yeah.
So
So,
I want to kind of think through what that might look like.
I mean, decisions like related to penalties, decisions related to, are the kids just going to keep the phones with them in their backpacks? Are we going to get yonder pouches? Do we have enough lockers at schools where they use a locker to put their phone away before the first bell and pick it up at the end of that? Those kind of decisions easily. I mean, we don't want, to the point about, we don't want teachers to constantly be having to police this. So I think Mr. Galbraith makes a great point about consistency, uniformity, and this seems to be actually the simplest thing to address that. When you start to introduce variation, even the committee can speak to, teachers and staff on the committee might want to talk about just point 2 on the exceptions of when authorized by a teacher for educational purposes. What does that look like? What does that mean? So all of those sorts of conversations, I think, are valid for the committee to provide input on.
Yeah, agreed. And I guess to that point on that's exactly what I was going to say, actually. But the on the penalties, if we are going to change instructional time to the school day, I think it's probably best on line 24 to change instructional time to the school day, because if not, and we do say may result and not shall, but unauthorized use may result in confiscation of a student's wireless communication device for the duration of the school day. That also implies that there may also be a time that it's confiscated for just the duration of a particular class period. So it just leaves some options there, but it's not. I think it's ambiguous on what that actual instructional time means after we pulled it out of the policy.
I'm going to add a little bit because we've talked as a leadership team about that potential ambiguity of instructional time as well. And part of the context was what Dr. Webb mentioned already with respect to study hall. Another piece I think she's touched on, but just for clarity's sake again, some of a high school student's lunch could be instructional time depending on what they're taking advantage of during that window. Most of our schools have an hour-long lunch. Some of them might be going for some interventions, et cetera. They might be doing some directed study with a teacher. But I can't visualize that the legislature intended, based on the common understanding of instructional time, that it was for sure 100% all the time the school day. That's not the common understanding of instructional time. Otherwise, they would have said during the school day. So with that, I do think that there is that nuance there that we need to think about. If you all vote for this to be during the school day, I do want to refer you back to one of the first things Dana said. That, to me, is a 2-reading policy. I think we owe it to our community to, at the least, have that discussion over the course of 2 readings. So keep that in mind.
Right. So realistically, just to piggyback off of that, and given our conversation earlier today about budget, our calendar may change. But as of right now, 2 readings would be 1 in June, 1 in August, based upon our current calendar. Obviously, if we have a special call meeting for other purposes, that may not be the case. So I will agree, based on the changes that I've written down, this is not appropriate to be a first and final, but they are all changes that are not they are doable. They are consistent, you know, we're not doing anything that isn't consistent with what y'all are allowed to do.
Ms. Clements has a comment on the phone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've just been kind of taking some notes, and I have a couple questions. So basically, if we don't do bell to bell, we wouldn't be able to change this until the following school year. Is that correct? So what we start with in August, I would think that we would keep the entire school year.
I'm going to answer that and invite the team as well. Not necessarily, and Dana, fill in on this. The two reading policy is our policy. So you said can't. I want to just make sure we're as clear as we can. You do have the power to suspend your policy. So I would argue from the chief executive's seat, it's not that you can't, but I would advise that you shouldn't because of the commitment we've made through policy.
Okay.
So,
Dana, you want to add to that?
Sure. And so another piece of your question, would it have to be next school year? I don't know that it would have to be if it was changed, you know, later on. I know at the policy meeting there was some discussion of changing it in January at the semester. I think that is, while it is obviously cleanest to do it before school starts, that doesn't, I don't think that if we don't do that, I don't think there's anything that makes it where you can't change it
And if
during
I
the school
may
year.
ask Dr. Webb to add to that, just kind of visualize from an implementation perspective at the high school level as best you can the practical impact of her question.
The practical impact, we'll just have to do additional planning of how we would address that. We did have some preliminary conversations about how we would address it, but we would just need to continue to meet this summer if we had an August implementation of none at all during the school day, just the logistics of expectations for teachers. Anytime that we have an expectation that there's a rule, you know, that our teachers feel the obligation to enforce it, and so we want to make sure we set our students and our teachers up for success and have a plan that they're able to implement, and that just takes time. You know, the summer is a time where we're planning for a lot of things, so we didn't spend time on too many hypotheticals. I wanted to collect their feedback and not spend time planning for something that may not happen, but get their philosophical feedback so that we could guide you guys as well as we could on how you make this decision. But we will need some time to plan for implementation so that it rolls off. Anytime we have any kind of rule change, how you start with kids is important, even in your own home. If you start with a rule change and students know immediately you're not able to enforce it, that sets the stage, that sets the tone. So when we change something as significant as this, and we're trying to change a behavior, we want to make sure that we set ourselves up for a successful implementation and not set up that students know that we're not able to enforce something that we're saying. So that would be my feedback, and generally speaking, and I don't see an issue for us if we do this in stages and have one stage and the conversation continues and then we come back and tighten it up at a later time necessarily. But I do have a concern if we create something and we aren't able to enforce it immediately, the long-term effects of reeling that back in. I don't know if that answers you enough, but we have some really great leaders and teachers. We'll figure it out, but it'll take a little time, right? Take some time to plan and to make sure that we do it effectively and fairly.
Ms. Clements, I hope you could hear all that.
I do want to add one.
It's a little difficult, but I'm trying. I've got it glued to my ear. I think I've been doing a little research on my own. Just and what I've found, just not just locally I've found just across the nation and even like at public and private, the higher achieving school districts have stepped away from cell phone use during the day. I know that my children are mostly older, and even when they were younger and would go to like church retreats and there was like a no cell phone policy, they would just leave them with me. The kids they were all together in the same boat, and so no one was on their phones. They were all interacting, and that they walked away from that experience with just, this was a wonderful experience because we were unplugged and we were together. And I even talked to one school locally that checked out like activities during lunches so that the kids could play games and do things, and they were off their phones and they were engaging. And I think that's a lifelong skill for the kids to have. So I'm still I'm not complete with my data dive and my research or what other high achieving school districts are doing, but I'm finding that this is a growing trend that people are having the kids step away from their phones. There's always landlines at school, and ways for the kids to check in if they need to. I just continue, just from my own children's experience, when they've put their phones down for, a full day or, for a weekend, they've been thankful for it. And I think it's just, if it's uniformly applied to all the kids, it will be, it will be helpful. So just my thoughts on that.
I did just want to add a little clarity to part of Donna's question. So in board policy 1.600, there is a procedure for expedited action. And we typically use this when it's housekeeping or clerical, so our editorial changes. But our policy does say on matters of unusual urgency, by an affirmative vote by the majority of the members of the board may waive second reading and take immediate action to adopt new or revised policies. So that is in your toolbox if that is the will of the board with this policy.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess I would be in favor of a second reading if it was possible to do that special meeting on the day that in July when we have our strategic retreat. That would give us a month to get some feedback from both staff and the technology committee. Let them mull over some of the things, then we'd have a little bit more information to go by on because, and I really think that this is going to be a distraction. It's going to be impactful. It's going to be a change, no doubt. I think this is going to be a change regardless. And so if we make this change and then we talk about another change for another, it's going to consume more time and energy than I think is worth it. And I think we could avoid that by, Jason and I have talked about ripping off the Band-Aid. It's a perfect analogy because if I don't know, but I can't say that it's definitely inevitable. But I know this board has been pretty focused on reducing unneeded technology use, and this one's pretty unneeded. So, but if it takes, that would allow us to have two readings to follow our process. We're gonna hopefully have a strategic meeting. I know you just talked about moving that into August, but I would prefer to move it back into July so that we do it before school starts. And if we did it prior to the 30th and the week before or so would probably be even better, just to give a little bit more time, because I think there's a lot of PD going on in the week preceding school.
The only thing I'd point out is I think I got the sense that because no one, maybe two people responded on the July 30th request originally, that might not have been a good date for folks. So we'd have to figure out, yet another, we're looking at June now for the special meeting on the budget, like the last week of June for that. We'd be looking at, in your situation, a July date for that special call meeting just for, it wouldn't be for budget, it'd be just for cell phone policy.
Well, I guess that would be for, I would think that, I would hope that it would be for the strategic meeting too, but, if we
Well,
could,
I guess
if
it
we
could
could find a
be
date.
if everybody were available.
Right.
So we've been looking at it at August 14th in that afternoon, so we need to get everyone to weigh in on a date in July, which we haven't picked yet, so we'd have to kind of figure that out, but I hear you.
I think however we decide we want this policy to look, we do need to focus our attention on what Dr. Webb was saying was the procedure to make sure that's rolled out right away when school starts. When I was talking with Dr. Allen, and he came up with some, pretty good scenario. I can't repeat all of his suggestions. The first one was a warning, and the second time was, some parent involvement and so forth. And so he already just off the top of his head was coming up with some pretty good ideas. So I think that's what we, regardless of what this decision is on what it's going to look like, I think that's where the board needs to make those decisions before school starts.
Have we definitively, I guess is there consensus that we that we need to have a second meeting in June for budget? We don't have a consensus or an appetite for making the budget change before the budget committee or before the county commission meets, right? So if that's where we are on that, then we're going to be having a special meeting the last week of June, which technically could be the second reading. This could be added to that agenda if that's the will of the board, but that's only given us
It doesn't give a ton of time
a week from between readings is what
Right.
it amounts to. So what are we gonna know differently by the second one?
Right.
Maybe we don't need to know anything different. Maybe it's just the procedure of having the second reading. But then you're saying we could pull the 1.600 card and not.
You
and
could, again.
Call it a matter of urgency and go ahead and do it one
Right.
time.
I don't know that you should, to echo Superintendent Golden. I
Right.
did want to be clear in answering Ms. Clement's question that you can.
Okay. Did you have something, Margie?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Hold on
So,
a second.
we're 7 weeks away from basically school starting, and my concern is, while I agree with the research, trying to make that big of a change in high school, I think we're gonna have a lot of resistance, not only from the kids, but from parents and community. I liked the idea of what Josh said of like doing the bare minimum, and then letting the committee, and getting community input on changing it. And then if we do the second reading in July, then that puts us days before school starts. And trying to implement all that in a system this large, I mean, that's gonna be pretty difficult. So,
Did you have something else, Claire?
I mean, I was just going to say, mid-July meeting makes more sense than end of July, if we could find a date that worked for people for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I'm just sitting here thinking through kind of on the fly here, the difficulty of calendars in the summer for, finding dates that work for a majority of people.
well, and that's another, like, how do we really get ahead of all the communication if we go complete no cell phones? And particularly, I mean, high school's gonna be the biggest. I mean, and I'm guilty of this. I'll be texting my son when he's at lunch, or because I'll say, hey, sorry, I can't, da-da-da, or where are you at this afternoon? And, I mean, I just really have concerns about that for our families. Maybe we give this year, or maybe even a semester, like you said, to let the technology committee
get some input, and then we can make, do like the campaign that we learned about from that one school, and do a big campaign so that when we do start it, I mean, it starts. And, yeah, I like that we're leaving it pretty much what middle school's already doing, and then kind of leave it with what high school's doing it for now, and then let that committee make the changes. That's what I would recommend.
The problem is that we're already having to address a lot of issues between now and the beginning of school. This isn't necessarily business as usual for high school, and so we're already going to have to we're going to have to do the rollout plan and so now right now we're having to create 2 rollout plans. We're having to create one for K through 8 and one for how to deal with high schools that can no longer take their phones out in class or between class, but they can take it out during lunchtime, which might be extended and is going to look a little bit. It's not just they can use them in the lunchroom. Their lunches everywhere, and for an hour, and so and lunch goes on for 2.5 hours for start and stop. I mean, it's not simple what we're doing based on this. Let's call it the minimum policy. So it's not just there's gonna be pushback. There's gonna be parent resistance right now, and so. I just think I think we could spend the summer addressing all of those concerns and have a second reading. But
in some ways, what you're saying argues for, in my mind, you need more time if it is going to be such a shock to the system, and we're going to need to have those rollout plans and communication and getting the staff and the building's acclimated to this. It needs more time, and if we're not making a final decision until mid-July or late July, then we're that much closer to school starting and that much less time to actually roll it out. So that's a fear I have. So
that's fine. Then let's invoke the 1.600 and make the decision on Monday, and then we got plenty of time.
I'll share a couple of thoughts, and then Dr. Royer, I think, wants to speak a little bit to the elementary schools as well. We used the word inevitable a couple of times, and Mr. Galber kind of shared where my thinking is. I think that we are almost for sure headed towards some version of that. How we get there is very important. And my experience with our community is they need communication. What I have seen from other communities is they need communication as well. And I appreciate what you're saying, and you and I had this discussion about the rip the Band-Aid off. There's the potential, well, not just the potential, it will happen. There will be some struggles no matter what you do. But where I'm at right now is we need to make sure that we get our parents involved in this decision if we're going to go beyond the law. And Dr. Webb spoke to some of the internal things. I'm speaking to the community. This isn't 100% true, and maybe it's just theoretically true, but Dr. Johnson spoke to it a little bit in her personal experience. Parents, at least theoretically, have the capacity now to limit their children's access. Now, the reality is different from theory, right? Because when their child's off somewhere, absent them creating some mechanism with apps to control it, they can't. But our reality is not very many do. I think it's important for us to find out from parents and what is the need during the day. Can we address those needs in how we roll this out? Dr. Webb gave a couple of examples. If they're communicating with their employer, where I'm at right now is I think we need to get our community involved in how we get there. We started that with the committee, and I want to share one other truism before I turn it over to Dr. Royer. And it's a Carol Birdsongism, maybe more than a truism. Our parents are disengaged during the summer. And so I worry about creating something like that. It's just, it's something to consider. Final piece before I give it, Dr. Webb said we'll do whatever you guys implement, and we will. We'll implement it. But my professional experience and observation is how we roll this out is going to have a big impact on how well it works in our community. And fast, in this case, is probably not great. Dr. Royer?
If you wait long enough to speak in a conversation, sometimes everything you want to say gets said, and Jason just said a lot of what I was going to say. From the elementary perspective, and I know we are talking about high school, sometimes I do like to let secondary have all the fun, but when we gathered feedback from our elementary principals, it really was about the community. Our parents are using this with our elementary students. Our elementary students are getting up and going to the bathroom in their cubby spaces and going to their phones or communicating with parents on watches. We haven't really talked as much about the wearable technology aside from the earbuds. That's going to be the key component for us in elementary, the watches. And then we've talked a bit, I know Drayson talked about the tracking or, being able to keep status. I think parents will express that concern in a much greater level, even though I do it with my older kids, about our elementary students. And so I fear if the rush will take some of our parents off guard at the elementary level, when I think that ultimately they agree. I think that we are in a space that people are paying way more attention to the screens, to even if it's the wearable screens. But that was a concern that came up at the elementary level, is really our parents are the ones using it during the school day to keep with or stay connected to our elementary students. So I just wanted to chime in about that piece. Again, our folks at the elementary level were excited by this conversation and feel like there's definitely a need for us to be doing it. But the rollout for us on our side will be challenges with the adults, whereas in the secondary, they may experience the challenges with the kids. So I just wanted to chime in and share that perspective.
Any other thoughts or feedback?
It would seem like maybe to address some of those things, like, and we kind of touched on this earlier, but instead of the turn off and stored, maybe we would be like silence and stored. I think you have to have the stored language in there, just so it's, whether that's a backpack or it's a locker or whatever it is, but I think the implication that's like not on your person. When it comes to the like watches and wearable technology, I think that would have to fall under all of this, wouldn't it? No matter what. I mean, even at the floor level, that's not going to be allowed, not in any sort of classroom setting. So,
If you look at the statutory definition, it talks about communication device, communication between two parties. So
yeah, that's watches and all of that. So I think that's kind of dealt with. But I mean, I get both kind of sides of the argument, like doing it now, K through 12, for the school day. I would argue for silenced and stored. But I also, to address Mr. Welch's point, I think too, with that caveat of point 2 there, authorized by a teacher for educational purposes, the language there, like maybe that's open for interpretation, and that's something that could be communicated by the team, I don't know, Dr. Webb or whatever, to them, that like our intent behind that, because I think that's a legitimate concern, and totally understand that. Makes sense to me. I think there could be a caveat for that. But I also am like, you're between a rock and a hard place. It's like we need to have it done now, but then we don't really want to do what we want to do now necessarily. And then like communication with the community, I mean, I think there'd be plenty of time for communication if we did it now, but that's not eliciting a lot of feedback, I suppose, on that. But what kind of feedback, is going to change it necessarily. Like, I mean, because at some level they just talk it, well, but my kid needs, their watch. Well, my kid needs this, my kid needs that. So I don't know that the overall majority of those concerns or communications from parents would do anything to like take us back from what the law is going to allow. So I guess if you were asking me personally, I'd be in favor of the K through 12 during the school day, silenced and stored, with a caveat for .2 there. That's kind of where I would think. But
So I'm at the same spot you are for the most part with it. I see in both sides of it. And I think by and large, we're probably all in agreement except, on the very margins. None of us really thinks, well, gosh darn it, those kids, they need to be Instagramming during math class. No, they don't do that. And spent some time in Japan earlier this year, and it was a great experience. But one thing I noticed is, boy, if you think we got a problem here, it is this over there and nonstop, and we certainly don't want to get there with it. The one thing that gives me pause is not knowing what we don't know, and I just feel like this is a big change. Because all the things that we're trying to avoid, we want to avoid. Again, we're on that, but we're at a different time with when we were kids and in school, and I can go, well, you got through school without them, but the world has changed, and I certainly couldn't do my job without looking at my phone a lot today, legitimately, for all kinds of tools and things I use, and how are our kids using it. So, going back and forth, I guess where I've sort of boiled down to is it that big a deal for us to go to 100% immediately versus going to 90% immediately, taking a little bit extra time to evaluate all the implications, and then getting that extra 10% or that extra 5 or 9 or whatever it is when we sort of learn and say, okay, these are the legitimate usages. That's sort of where I'm pause at, is not the kids need to be in communication with their parents during the school day. They don't. When I coached wrestling or soccer or something like that, it would drive me nuts. Parents coaching from the sidelines, No. They need to focus on the math. No, they need to focus on the lecture and their work and everything. They don't need to hear what do they want from whatever for dinner tonight, right now. Do that later. So again, we're all on board with that. But and it's not a hill I'm going to die on or worry about, but I do think that let's go fast, but let's not go all the way immediately. Let's pause just short a little bit, and I think kind of that's more of what this is doing right now, is it's pausing just short a little bit. It's talking about the 9 through 12 only, the K through 8. It seems we're all in compliance with or in agreement more with the, lock it down. That's already what we're doing right now. But I just think that last little bit, let's pause a little bit on there and give ourselves the wiggle room to make those final adjustments, rather than going all the way there, realizing, well, there's some things that we need to do, and then backing off at that point. That seems more of a harder ask to go from 0 to 100 and then back to 97 than just going from 0 to 90 and then to 97, if that makes sense.
And you would like for lunches, like leave it for the high school, like lunch period?
Yeah, I probably would, and I don't disagree that with a lot of things like, they don't need to be Instagramming during lunch. They don't need to, and that's a lot of what they'll do, and it's wasted time. But they're doing it right now, and it's not the end of the world. It's, if we can pull it out of the classroom, we can focus. And part of me also goes, you know what, if they're doing it during their personal time lunch also, so what? You know, it's their personal time. Do whatever the hell they want there, as long as it's not, you know. Right, yeah, obviously, those things.
So I guess I don't disagree with any of that. I think we're all kind of around the edges, but what about a potential pass this policy with hopefully a couple of changes. Hopefully we can differentiate. I mean, I think we do need to take off the turn off. I think that's going to be a really big issue. But second reading, like I think the compromise position here might be, let's make a decision quickly and set a future start date for the second half of this policy, which presumably would be K through 12 for the school day, to give us time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the sooner we make that decision, the more time we have for feedback, communication. And the feedback, to Tony's point, is not really, what do you think? Do you think we should do this?
Mm-hmm.
It's, what are the concerns that you have? Because the communication plan is all about addressing those concerns. Most of them are predictable. I think we could nail them in 20 minutes if we sat down and just wrote out a list. There might be a couple that we're going to try to figure out. We got to figure out, okay, well, how does a student get in touch with their parent if in the case of a non-emergency, but if they just want to get in touch with them? How does a parent get in touch with a student for those things? We know the emergency things, but we're talking of what we're going to hear back is the urgent things that we want to tell our kids, but then they want to tell us. But so I don't know. What do y'all think about making a decision quickly and setting, let's, after the first quarter, like right after fall break, you come back and we're going to make a decision. That gives us 12 weeks between now and then.
What if we pose the question to staff, Jason and your team, about the process or how that would actually look in practice? So if we pass this on first reading tonight, basically as written with maybe a couple of wording changes, but the intent of it being that it's in high school, it's allowing it for lunch and no other time, basically. And that's what we start the school year with. And that's what's communicated out to everyone starting as soon as you want to start it, right? And then at some date certain, we're coming back for a second reading. There's no requirement second reading be the next meeting, right? It can be whenever we want, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're making me think.
We've done that before. We've had second meeting that's not followed consecutively.
We have. We've pulled. I think the difference is, to your point, Eric, in this particular case,
Let me help you. Maybe if we have it on the agenda and we move to defer it, that gets us where we want to go.
I still would want to vote. I think we can. There's nothing in the policy that would prohibit us from doing this. I just don't think that we've done it like this before. We've pulled a first and either not had a policy or kept the current policy. I can't remember when it's been a new policy and then our second reading.
So, okay, well, here's a different way to skin the cat.
Okay.
So if we do what's written here,
Sure.
that can be done with first and final.
Yes, and I know with the tweaks, with the changes that everybody's wanting, yes.
It would still just be first and final, eligible for that.
Yes, comfortable with that.
So we could, to your point, if we do first and final, then we've adopted the policy. But the intent of the board could be that we're going to come back in August or September board meeting and revisit it with the goal of adding something to it if that's the will of the board, and by then having potentially some feedback from the committee that would help inform whether that's the decision we want to make or not. Am I fairly stating that?
Yeah, I guess I would still, if we end up having a special meeting, and if we end up having a meeting in July, like I would, for the strategic meeting, my point was to make make this decision as quickly as possible, to give as much time for that communication rollout. That's all. I mean, and I don't think, Dana, I think what we had talked about, if we did this, so we make this first and final, but an ultimate decision on an addition to this policy, I think could happen as a second reading of this, so as a second reading, and not take 2 more readings necessarily.
I think it could be a first and final / second reading, with the caveat of what changes. So I don't want to put that in stone, but yes, I think we have that option. Now, if the feedback, you want to completely rewrite the policy, we'll talk about that at the time. But if it's what I think we all anticipate the change to be, absolutely we can. And I'm fine if we want to go ahead and make the decision that this policy, you vote on it in June and then it's revisited in August, September, whatever. I'm fine with putting it on whatever policy, date, and going ahead and deciding that, if there's not a July special call.
I'm of the opinion that meets the spirit of why we have 2 readings. Give time to think about it, give time for the community to know what's being discussed.
So for me, again, the issue's not going fast. I'm fine with, even if we pass this in the first reading as is, and that's the policy going forward. If we want to do it in 2, I'm fine with that. It's not anything. I'm just saying, as this is right now, this is a substantial change, and I think it's a good substantial change. But talking about, we're going to pass it and then we're going to make additional changes in August or September. Let's pass it and make the substantial changes, and then that it is now, and then revisit it after the school year. Let's actually see how it impacts. We're 6 months through. That last piece that we're talking about, again, if we're going to go 90% of the way there, can we really not live with not having that last 10% for 1 year? It's been nothing all the way since. It also seems to me to address one of the biggest concerns is policing it for our teachers, and so it gives them the chance to do the policing in the classroom to start, and then if and when we decide we want to expand that, then they can focus just policing it on the non-instructional times or what have you. Just give ourselves and our staff and our teachers just a little wiggle room for any unintentional errors that we make, and then go ahead and always add more, but not have to pull back and correct. Again, my 2 cents.
Lee and Julie, can you speak to the way it would look from your perspective if this got implemented the way it's written now? When would you start, and how would you communicate this to your teams? And then if there were to be a change, say following the first 9 weeks, hypothetically, that took it all the way, or if that change were made sometime later, semester or school year. I mean, talk about the phase-in approach to that and how that either is feasible or not feasible from your perspective, or disruptive.
I think the question is not the feasibility, but the disruptiveness. I think the way you switched at the end makes a lot of sense. If we were to pass it straight away, the way that it is right now, we would begin, well, for both of us, we would continue that communication, right? Because our principals know this is happening and it's coming. So The first steps we would take is pull together a group of administrators to talk about the consequences, or what's called the penalties here. We will expect uniformity across all 30 of our elementary schools specific to the devices, and not just the implementation of the policy, but what the consequences are. So that would be our first step, and then begin sharing and gathering that feedback via email, because we won't all be together until July. And then in July, when we're together with our principals and assistant principals together, rolling it out, working through the kinks, talking through some scenarios of what we're going to do to enforce those consequences that we come up with. The same thing would happen if we decided to do something where we changed the policy. If we started with one thing in August and then moved into maybe something in December, or even some pilots, a couple of pilot schools where we did this, and then let them go through all the challenges and work through all the kinks, and then even extend that further to the following year. So, but it would still be the same. We would still gather the people, whatever we implement, whatever the will of the board is to implement, we're going to gather folks to figure out what the penalties are, consequences. Again, we don't really say penalties, but what the consequences are, and talk through scenarios and how people are going to do it. And the only other thing I'd add is that we would probably have those, it would be a standing agenda item. So we would talk about how the implementation was going consistently throughout the year. I think another thing that whatever this is, I think we'll ask all of our elementary administrators to communicate with their families during the summer. To Mr. Golden's point, Carol reminds us often that people are not present in our community in the summer, and so a lot of principals do not consistently send their weekly newsletters, but we would begin to share this information individually from the school principal rather than rely on just in focus. So we'd begin that communication pretty quickly so that people knew what to expect. Dr. Webb?
It's a great explanation. Our process would be similar in collecting feedback along the way, communication, and I think a key element of the communication is the why behind it, for our community, for our students, for our teachers, for everyone. And we've had late implementations for different things for various reasons over the years. They're a little bit more, a little more difficult to implement, but nothing to overcome that we couldn't overcome. Second semester changes are pretty frequent. We have natural transition points at the start of each semester at the high school level, because this is the significant change, let's be honest, for us in secondary is high school. Middle school, there isn't really a significant change. We do a natural reteaching at the beginning of each semester anyway, sometimes at the beginning of a quarter. So I don't have concerns about a change. I'm of the mentality I would rather go slow and get it right than to go fast and have problems. And so I think most of our administrators would be in line with that.
Any thoughts about the family communication plan for, even if it's just what's on the screen?
We're definitely going to send some messages out to families. We haven't worked on the detail of that yet. And what we find is it's going to take multiple methods of communication, and even then we won't catch everybody. So we'll send emails out. Sometimes we'll send a text out and say there's an email about an important change or something like that. Principals will communicate this, wherever you guys land at the orientation times with students, and they always have those conversations. So we'll hit multiple targets with it, as we typically do with communication plans. And the content is going to depend on where you all land, right? And so if it does become immediate, we'll let them know that. I'm not terribly concerned about our process for communication, but because we are going to spend the time to put it together, the timing of it and making sure that and one of you mentioned this, and what are your concerns? Jay, I think you mentioned that. Tony, you spoke to this briefly as well. I do want to, and I know this wasn't your question, but I want to make sure that we give parents an opportunity to share with us, not just us sharing with them. And how that looks is going to depend on how you all vote and when it's implemented. I'm going to restate, I've become convinced that this, in the long run, is going to be good for our students somehow, some way. The question again is, how do we get there?
So, may I ask
Yeah.
a question? Sorry, Jean, Dan. I'll be quick. If it ended up that it was the will of the board to vote in a true away for the day policy, in my readings, looking at how different school districts implemented similar policies, some of them had a grace period. And so I wanted to see whether there would be an opportunity for that if we voted in, a true away for the day, but then gave the first semester of a grace period to iron out all the kinks, let the administration figure out what worked best, sharing those, best practices, et cetera, and then, and sharing data with parents and kids on why we're doing this. Here's what the data shows. Here's how your brain is changing, your developing brain is changing when you're using your phone.
Yep.
And setting the expectation that when you come back to school in January, that's when enforcement happens.
Just off the cuff, we haven't spoken as a team, but philosophically, I like that idea. Could you guys speak to that? We'll definitely talk about it as a team.
I think it's absolutely an idea to consider.
Josh, by voting on this, we satisfy the state, correct? That's one point. The other point is about shutting the devices down. I think that will hit a nerve with parents. I think with the 360 communication and stuff, where they can just look on their phone, they can see the child's in the classroom or whatever. So why can't we change that one line that we're concerned with there about not shutting them, store them during school day, but they can be left on silent mode or whatever.
So, Mr. Cash, to your question, I've already done a little bit of tweaking in anticipation of Monday night, and gonna line through the are turned off and stored, and put the language not used during the school day. I'm gonna do that for K-8 and 9 through 12, and then I also removed under penalties, which I've now renamed consequences, removing the improper storage piece, since that's, we're gonna allow them to possess them, and they can be on. It's gonna be monitoring whether or not they're using them. So
Okay, so
that would be for Monday night.
And I believe you mentioned this, but why can't we pass this as first reading final with a notation on there that this will be revisited at X amount a month? And that'll give time for feedback for the instructional committee to give their recommendations. It'll give the principals some more time. And I agree with Claire on this also. But we're going back and forth here, and we got to finish this policy as it is to vote on it for a final.
Yeah, everything you just said, I agree with the one exception being that I don't think we would put in the policy language that says it would be revisited. I think we would just, for the record, state tonight that we plan to revisit it at a certain point.
Well, but we can revisit it. We went through that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that
Yeah.
would just, to me, be security that we can go back and do it. But if
Yeah.
that's fine with.
We'll state that that's our intention to do that, and then hold ourselves to it. But I don't think we'd write that in the policy per se.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
that's fine.
The only other thing, Dana, besides everything you just mentioned, is what Jay alluded to earlier, line 24, changing that from saying for the duration of the instructional time to changing.
Sorry, I
school
also
day.
changed that
Okay.
to school day. I failed to mention that.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be the other change.
Okay. So with the changes she just recited, if that clean copy comes to us Monday night for a vote, first and final, is there consensus that we're good to do that and move on, and then with our stated intention of revisiting this in a few months' time after we've had more feedback from the committee and potentially more thought among us as a board?
Yes.
I just ask for Dana and Bobby to help come up with some language on the actual motion. I'd like to just clarify that this is first and final for means to address the urgency of getting a policy in place, but the second reading will follow potentially, like, if the second reading will follow, and it'll be a second reading, like not a new first reading.
Well, I don't really know if we need to do that, because if we do first and final, it's our policy. And so then it would just then require somebody bringing an amendment to the policy back up, like we would any other policy.
But based on our policy, that would take 2 readings from then. I just want to,
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if going from what we have now to restricting use except for lunch is eligible for a first and final, then potentially moving from lunch to away for the day entirely would also have to be eligible for first and final.
Correct.
So,
Yes.
so really, if that was the change we were going to make, and it's really the only change remaining to make, if we did this, it would only take first and final. Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair, to address the 2 or 3 times Dr. Royer made the comments, can we change penalties to
Clearly,
to
you were not
consequences?
listening.
Oh,
I have
missed
I
that.
have
missed
changed
that.
that.
I'm sorry.
I did.
apologize. I missed that. I can't get the work done without it. Sorry about that.
All right, so we are good with, is there a clear understanding of what our plan is for Monday night?
Yeah. And if I may, Mr. Chair, one extra piece. You mentioned Bobby Cook. He's actually out of town. We're going to have another attorney from Berger, Mosley, and Carson here.
And so is Ms. Osbrooks. So anything you need on this policy or the other ones we're getting ready to talk about in the next 10 minutes, hit me tomorrow.
So I understand, what's being proposed. I like my proposal better. So I've been pretty consistent about where I stand on this, and I would prefer that we vote in a true away for the day and then do a slow roll implementation and take that first semester to message to parents and the community and students, and then have a hard implementation in January. That would be my strong preference.
To that point, Mr. Chair, it's probably wise for each of you to, if you have a particular motion in mind, let's do a double check and make sure that you're prepared for that motion on Monday.
Yeah, if you intend to bring up something other than what Dana just recited, then just give a heads up so that we can, and have it in writing so that we can read it verbatim.
Sorry, just to beat this horse, sorry. Is there any value, or is it needed to say, I know, Dana, you're going to switch it to not used, you said, correct? Is there any value to having silenced and not used, or is that just kind of a given or implied, or?
And you said silenced and stored. Those are some. That's language I
Yeah,
jotted
but
down.
I'm fine with not used, versus stored. I just wonder if there's any value to that they're silenced. I don't know.
So I stuck
Yeah.
with the not used because about 3 hours ago when we started this discussion, y'all wanted it to track the language of the law, which it does. And we are saying that they can possess them. They can have them on their person, which I think is important because of the tracking.
We can reopen this.
As long as they're not used. I
later
don't mind adding silence.
date.
That doesn't.
I kind of like it.
I would, just for
Are not,
teachers'
are
sake or
silenced
whatever.
and not used.
Silenced and not
Okay.
used. Yeah,
Sure.
Okay,
just,
that's good.
Thanks for your indulgence. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on that? Okay. Hey.
Jason, it only took 2 hours. I said 3, so I mean, we.
You think that
Daylight
discussion took 2
savings.
hours, really? Did it really?
It absolutely took 2 hours.
Oh.
66%. That's not bad.
You know what, that's a good, that was a good discussion, though.
It was.
I think it was meaningful and respectful and important. That's the kind of discussions we should be having.
All right. So remember, we pulled 2 policies for second reading off consent. That now is our next item, F. And the first one is 4.601 on second reading. I'm not putting you on the spot, Tanya, but you did request them to be pulled. So do you have thoughts about that one first, 4.601?
Yes. I've struggled with this policy. Okay, I gotta change gears here, right? Yeah, so I've struggled with this policy from the beginning. I've always liked the idea, or I asked my kids the other day, they graduated between 2010 and 2015. I says, did you guys get your tests back and quizzes? And they all said yes. And my oldest daughter says yes, and I believe that I got to keep most of them. The other ones didn't really recall. And I think that's really important, that the kids have an opportunity to see where they've made their mistakes, where they need to maybe study more on, depending on the topic, for the final exams. And I don't have a preference if the students keep them or if they look at them and then the teacher returns them. I'd like to see discussion in the classroom if it's appropriate on that kind of thing. But I do have a problem with the retesting and reassessment part, in that I think that should be the exception and not the norm. And I feel like that's leading to, when we have, like they will provide specific feedback and stuff. So basically my recommendation is that we completely eliminate on page 1 lines 25 through 28, and also on the second page lines 1 through 8, and just make it so that the student, so it's kind of changing it quite a bit, but that's where I'm at on it.
All right, thank you. Any discussion?
I have similar concerns, and I think part of that's driving it too is also worry about it creating a culture for at least a subset of our students, not all of them, but I don't have to give it my all for this exam because I'll just retest and I'll get there. And I do worry about that being an unintended consequence of it, that I can make it up later. And there will be a subset that will look at that, and that'll be the implication of it. Not only that, but just creating that culture. It's, when they get out of school and the big boy and big girl world, sometimes there's not second chances. This is the test, this is the presentation to your boss, this is the justification, this is the, trying to pass the bar, trying to get the certification for whatever it is. So mandating that a little bit heavier, it gives me concern by making that required, as opposed to where we are now, where teachers have the flexibility, and I think they have the goodwill when they see that the students just hasn't gotten it, that there is additional requirement needed. They do provide that by and large. So I'm in agreement with you.
So if I could, I guess just want to be clear, and I'll get Dr. Webb to clarify, since Dr. Allen's not here, but this started as a test correction retesting policy. It evolved into this, which is effectively what the teachers are supposed to be doing now as part of their PLC process. And so the problem that I was trying to solve here is the very narrow opportunity that some schools were providing, even as it relates to IEPs, and they were limiting the reassessment, reteaching process in such a way that it didn't allow for a lot of these things to happen. It was basically, if you, the only IEP accommodation is, we're going to allow you this, and this is the way it's gonna happen. It was it took out all the flexibility for the IEP team, or even for teachers in some extent, because there were school policies that says we don't do this for anybody, and if we do it if we do it in a limited exception for IEPs, this is how it's going to do. So this was more of this is very flexible. I guess, Dr. Webb, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how this looks compared to what your expectation is already of the teachers and how they're supposed to be teaching.
Thank you for the question. So I agree with the conversation that Mr. Galbraith is alluding to with Dr. Allen in regards to what our expectations are. Our expectations are that once we teach something and a student doesn't learn it the first time, that we don't move forward and neglect the opportunity to get the student to learn the essential content. And so we call that question 3. What do you do when the students don't learn? It's part of our language, it's part of our process. We challenge our curriculum teams, and that's groups of teachers in the same building that teach the same subject and grade level. We challenge them to figure out collectively what are the best practices to help students learn the content they don't learn in their first attempt. This and every school and every team is in a different place, but they're all working together to ensure that we have opportunities for students to master the essential content. We're still moving forward as a class because we have to move forward, but having opportunities for students to go back, get exposed to that content again. So philosophically, this is where we are and where we're headed. There are some teams that are well ahead of others within the same building across the district, but this is the aim of where we're headed. And it could be as simplistic as we look at our data as a curriculum team and we determine, wow, there are 2 standards that our students really didn't master. So let's start reteaching those during a bell ringer or during our core content, and then have some additional questions on our next assessment to see if the students are learning it, and then try again. Or it could be that there are only 3 students in class who are not learning it, and so let's figure out how we're going to get them to intervention so that we can reteach them. And maybe that reassessment is verbal during that session of intervention, or maybe it's more formal, and it's associated with their grade in some form or fashion. But we really want to give the autonomy to the teaching teams, because it looks different if I'm teaching AP Physics or if I'm teaching 6th grade math. It may look a little bit different if I'm teaching ELA at the 8th grade level. So we believe in autonomy for our teaching teams, but we also believe that if a student doesn't learn something the first time, that we continue to try to get those essential standards mastered before the end of the semester or the end of the school year. Now, the work becomes that team has to determine what are those essential standards. What are those pieces that are needed for every student to understand before they move on to the next grade level. But that is the essence of our work. As I shared at the policy meeting, this is our work whether it's in a policy or not. We understood Mr. Galbraith's perspective of wanting to put something like this in policy, but we feel confident in the work that's taken place, whether it's in a policy or it isn't.
So that was a key point that I was just about to ask you, as far as if we don't put this in a policy, this is our practice. And so the point with having it in the policy is so that it's visible to parents and students, and not just in a SOP somewhere where they have to learn about it in some other way. Like this is what we're going to do, even if we don't put it in the policy.
If I may add a little bit to that, and Dr. Webb fill in, This was prompted in part by a comment Mr. Welch made just a minute ago where you said the implication of retesting, and a conversation I had with one of our teachers about the implication of this language. As I understood it, one of the concerns is, might a parent read this and say, you have to retest and my child's going to get another grade, et cetera. And my answer to that is, we still want teachers to have that broad discretion, that broad autonomy to decide what that reassessment means. And Dr. Webb spoke to that in some detail, but I felt like it was worth emphasizing. And my response to that was, in essence, because we know the practice, I'm not worried about that. But I get that concern from a teacher that it may seem like it means more than that. And so I think it's important for us to speak to that. We are not mandating, and by the way, the first policy draft actually included regrading even, right? And so this is very far from that. So Dr. Webb, can you speak to that and what this language means, just so there's some clarity on that?
Yes, I echo what you just stated and just refer back to my prior statement. So it could mean a curriculum team could determine that there is some more widespread reassessment and regrading that takes place, but this policy doesn't require that. If there's a feeling of the board that this reads too broad and we need to, add a sentence of clarity that what it doesn't mean is that everyone is, reassessing every student on every standard. But we can certainly make sure that outside of the policy that our schools are doing a thorough job of teaching our families and teaching our students what it does mean. In my practical experience, most of our families are not looking at board policies for interpretation. They're really looking to their school level teams for guidance and tell us what the school year is going to look like and what does teaching and learning look like in my classroom. They're depending on the teachers to describe those things. So we have methods of doing that at the school level and at the teacher classroom level. And so we would ask at the secondary level that not only our principals communicating and reemphasizing that, but really it goes back to the classroom teacher. And so we have that in the policy, I believe, where we're asking the teachers to communicate at the beginning of the year what that looks like in their classrooms.
So you said something there that maybe, and I can't speak for Tanya, but you hit on my concern. Maybe it was a misunderstanding on my part, but you used the word regrading. Mm-hmm. And that's where I have the issue, and I use examples. There's a certain segment of our kids that
Sure.
will go, well, I can just take it again.
Yeah.
There's also another segment of our kids on the highest level that we know will use it and go, well, I only got a 95. I want to take it again to get that 100.
Perhaps there's a larger percentage of those, right?
There is, and we've seen kids who won't take Tim Sawyer's CAD class.
That's right.
Because it's only a 4.0
Good point.
scale, even though they're engineering students and it would do a world of good for them. Or I'm going to go out for track just so I don't have to take PE because it's not a 4 point whatever. God bless the high achievers and everything else, but they will work the system. We know they will. So if you're telling me that there's not a mandatory regrading in there, that alleviates a lot of my concerns. That's my biggest issue is I didn't get the score that I wanted. I want to retake on it, and you have to give it to me. Sometimes, look, you took the test, you just didn't do well. That's life. Not the portion of you didn't learn. We're just not going to teach you anymore.
Great question. Our practice and our recommendation for this policy is not about a grade. It's about learning. And so we ask our teachers, what do you want students to learn? How do you know that they learned it? And what do you do when they don't? And what do you do when they learn it quickly and everyone else has it? How do you enhance the learning and the depth of their knowledge? But the most important thing is when they don't get it the first time, what do you do when they don't learn it? Because there are essential content aspects of every core subject that we teach that are essential to the next grade level. And so we want to make sure that those essential things are continued to be discussed, talked about, taught, and reassessed. And many times that is unassociated with a grade. Sometimes it is associated with a grade, but that's where we believe the autonomy belongs with the curriculum team, the individual teachers making those determinations of what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate. As to your point, motivation is a factor, but we want the teachers to make those decisions. We don't have a recommendation for at the district level to make that uniform.
And let me add this in a more broad sense. We'll be fine whether or not this language is in the policy, because we want to make sure those teachers have that autonomy. And we spoke to this a little bit at the policy committee meeting. This reflects our practice. If it's the will of the board that you believe that the families need to have that, then we'll honor that. But one way or the other, it's not going to change our practice, making sure teachers have the autonomy, but do go back and implement that third question, making sure that those students have mastered those standards they need to master. Dr. Webb and Dr. Royer, have I spoken to that appropriately?
You have, and that's part of our collaborative time that we provide teachers, is to have time to look at their data, to know which students learned the content, which they didn't, and have conversations collectively about best practices of how to reteach it and the best way to do it, while still moving forward with the other, with the pace of the class and the pacing, so that all students continue to progress.
And I can't resist this. I've got to share this. When we talk about professional learning communities or PLCs, those teams are asking these 4 questions that Dr. Webb's alluded to. What do the students need to learn? What do they need to know? And that's when we drill down to the standards. And our teachers are incredible at that, drilling down to the depth of the standard. Question 2, how will we know if they know it? How will we know that they learned it? And that's often our common formative assessments, where we're asking some specific questions to determine and identify whether the students have shown mastery to the depth they need to master it. What do we do when they don't learn it, which is what Dr. Webb has been spending most of the time on tonight. And then what do we do if they have shown it? And that's that piece that she mentioned briefly about advancing students perhaps to some better depth even than the standard.
So to address some of the, teacher concerns, you referenced maybe adding a line, and we did get an email from a teacher. You weren't included on it, Dr. Webb, so I wanted to share what the changes that were proposed, and to see if it's worthwhile adding. So if we can scroll to that particular paragraph on teaching and reassessment of learning. I think the most important addition would be at the very end, which was just to add a sentence that said methods should be chosen by the teacher or teaching team and may not necessarily lead to grade changes. So that communicates to those parents who might read policy that, reassessments aren't going to lead to a different grade. And I would be comfortable adding that. One other piece that might make a difference is in line 4, let's see, at the sentence that says teachers should use research-based engagement practices to encourage full effort on initial, and then strike and subsequent. So it would just read teachers should use research-based engagement practices to encourage full effort on initial assessment. So that's what she proposed, and I wanted to share it because you weren't included on that email.
I think those are rock solid recommendations. Yes.
Do you agree?
Dana, you missed it.
Yes.
We are broadcasting, so
So the odds of me getting it tomorrow are far better than this evening.
Yeah.
Is that? But my question is that what are we doing? Like, do we want changes?
Too bad Robert's rules don't apply in a work session, but it's a good try. So I guess we've had 2 things put on the floor in terms of changes to the policy, and one was what Tanya laid out at the beginning of the discussion, and then one was what Claire just described. So I think my best direction to us would be that this is on second reading. If there's consensus for either of those options, then we would be wise, I guess, to go ahead and include that in a draft for Monday. But I don't know if there is consensus to do that. And I guess the other option, of course, is you bring those as amendments to the policy Monday night.
So I share a lot the same concerns as Ms. Hibma and Mr. Welch with just, I've struggled with this policy too, kind of from the beginning, with student motivation to do well the first time, the rigging of the system that whether you're on the low end or the high end, you know, we know they probably would try and do. But I worry a lot too, and we've kind of spoken about the teacher autonomy, and I know we spoke, Superintendent Golden and I, after the policy meeting and stuff, and I still have those same concerns, and I know we've talked about kind of the teaching teams, and they would kind of come up with their thing. My concern with that is when you've got a teaching team that's kind of at odds on what that best practice should be, you know, well, then you got to go to someone above them, right, to make the decision. And what's that going to look like? You know, I would hate to see a high-performing teacher that, and it's just been my experience so far, and the ones that I've talked to, they seem like they don't want to do, you know, this retaking, retesting, reassessment piece. And then the ones that seem like they do go for it, you know, they're at odds on that. I would have loved, and I know it probably would be hard, I brought it up at policy with Dr. Allen, and this is a weird time of year, but I'd love to see any data on teachers that do implement retakes or different sorts of those kind of assessments and things versus teachers that don't, and what their kind of like scoring models and all of that looks like for how their students progress through the year, if we have any of that data. But I worry, I just really worry that this is going to remove a lot of that teacher autonomy, and I worry that the consensus would be automatically, or not automatically, but would move towards more retakes, more reassessments, which I fear that that's just going to lower the standard at the end of the day and really, really impact the teachers' autonomies. And so I would be in favor, like Ms. Hibma proposed, with at least removing on page 2, lines 1 through 8. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So I guess I'll just make one final plea, and we're talking about how students are gonna use this to their advantage in a bad way, and I just want to make sure that you recognize my reason for doing this was the students whose first assessment didn't accurately reflect how much they knew. For whatever reason, they were checked out. They were not motivated necessarily, but and I've seen the impact of what a 15 on a test can do to a student's motivation if they have no way to catch up. I was like, they're checked out, they're done. Like, and is that really the so first test of the semester, I make a 15. I know what's the likelihood of me making hundreds on everything else, and so how do you engage that student to want to be there after they bombed a test, and it could have been something that was totally their fault, or it could have been something completely unavoidable, and they had whatever situation was going on that they just weren't present at that test and they didn't do well. Do you want that to impact how are they going to learn if you can't get them motivated?
Yeah, it's a good point you bring up. I've been that student throughout my career at times in high school and college. So I share that concern. You know, I think it's legitimate, totally. But also, gosh, if I was to play the devil's advocate, it's just like sometimes that happens in life. And is there more benefit to creating something to make that up, or is there more benefit to working to, well, here's how you move forward?
But you don't move forward. You can't. You just failed.
Well, you can.
No,
You
I
can
mean,
move
like
forward.
under the existing structure that doesn't outline for parents to look and say, no, there should be a way, and I'm even fine with Claire's language to say that this may or may not lead to increase in grade. I'm just talking about how do you get the student to engage to continue learning if there's no hope. And so this absolutely does not say that everybody gets a second chance, or even you can expect a retake and a regrade on anything like that. That's not at all what this language says, and it doesn't even protect the student that I'm thinking of from not having a way out. But it does give the teacher some autonomy to help that student on an individual basis. They don't have to do it for everybody. They can do it for that student because it was that student's individual needs. That's what I want to protect, is that teacher's ability to look at students as individuals, not at, well, we can't, our policy says that we can't help you, so you're just out of luck.
I don't know.
But does our policy say that, though?
Yeah.
I mean, does
No,
the
no,
policy
no.
say that
but
we can't help it?
It
help them?
doesn't, but the practice is that they invoke this policy, that this procedure that the schools have enlisted, that's more stringent than this provides the autonomy. And so what happens in practice today is that while this exists and we say this is our practice, what is actually our practice is something that's more strict and doesn't allow the autonomy at the teacher and the team level.
I don't know that I agree with you on that. That's not been my experience with it, that both personally and from conversation with others, I think, there are always exceptions to the rule, but by and large, I think our teachers want our kids to be successful, and then when they do go off the rails, rather than sort of going, yep, you're screwed for the rest of the year, there is, okay, this is the way that you can earn it back or make it back or help you. I mean, just the number of teachers that my kids had who did, come before or after class, or the opportunities to review and learn the material. And many times, too, you can claw back by doing corrections or so forth, did exist there without the policy. So to say that there's a policy in place that doesn't allow that, I don't think that's quite accurate, because there's nothing that restricts from that. It does give the teachers the autonomy. It's anything sniffing of, and I feel much more comfortable about this after what Dr. Webb has said, but anything that sort of smells of mandating that you have to do regrades, that's just not life, and I don't think it's beneficial to the whole. We shouldn't be making policies for all of them because of exceptions to the rule. Your example where a kid got a 15 on an exam, that I think is more of a better held at the individual, at the classroom level, at the student, the teacher, and the parent and the principal all sort of figuring something out, than us trying to mandate through policy that in every scenario this is how it must be done each time.
Well, I agree with that, and that's why we're not mandating that this need to be done. But I will tell you that based on practice, it's not based on a policy, but it is based on standards that are invoked at the school level, that limit that limit teacher autonomy to make those exceptions, and they just don't have it. And to specifically around, if you, in an IEP, they limit this, there's only one avenue to do this, and it's test corrections under these circumstances and under this prescriptive measure, and that's it. That's the only one that they'll approve.
And you're talking about in the context of grades?
In the context of grades, and
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, because I don't read this policy as written to be specific to grades.
It's not.
Yeah.
But it goes, I mean, it's not only grades, for sure. I'm
Yeah,
speaking.
that's right. It would be a tool that a teacher would have the autonomy.
Agreed.
And it may be that we need to spend some time, and I know Maria's sitting here, examining what the IEP teams are committing to in that context. That's something that we need to look at. Dr. Webb, would you mind speaking to not just that, but the discussion about a school standard related to what Mr. Galbraith had concerns over?
Absolutely. Mr. Galbraith has shared that example with us, and we actually have ongoing conversations, and we have already collected some input from schools and surrounding that very topic. And our hope is that this is finalized by the beginning of the school year, and then we can wrap our arms around that particular practice that he has identified at a particular school, and we can identify where else that may be taking place, and refine that as needed. But yes, he's brought that to our attention, and I do know that to be true based on our conversation and my follow-up. I do think it's isolated, but we are collecting we did collect feedback, and we have another scheduled meeting to review that data and to make some decisions about what we need to do to correct some of those practices that may be existing. I want to say, too, since my microphone's still on, is that I've really enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank our board for the conversation around this policy. I think this is a great example of how the engagement in this instructional practice and teaching practice, and us continuing to look at this policy and hear feedback from people has continued to make it stronger. And so I've been thankful, and I know the conversations that Julie and Dave and I've had surrounding these, we've grown from the conversations, and it's pushed us to look at some aspects that we haven't looked at previously or haven't looked at recently, and refine some things. So this has been a healthy conversation, and I'm thankful for our board members for engaging in it with us.
I want to add one tiny little piece related to that. Sorry. Dr. Webb said correct. That means it shouldn't have been happening. So, sorry, Mr. Chair.
One question I've had kind of as this, going back to the original discussion on this, and it's been a hesitation for me, is I appreciate the deference, what you just said about the deference to the board and trying to be flexible to this conversation and, adapting things. And but what I've also heard you guys say, subtly, I guess, is that so much of what's written here in this policy is what you already do, and that you would be doing this whether you had a policy or not. That maybe the policy, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but maybe the policy isn't needed in order to accomplish what it seeks out to do, right? So I'm wondering, just at one level, can you talk about how much in this policy, other than maybe that isolated situation that was just referenced, how much in this policy is actually different than what is current practice, or different than what teachers already have the ability to do and are inclined to do? Because the other fear I have is that it starts to adopt this policy starts with the premise that teachers aren't doing everything they can to help students master these subjects. And I believe they are doing everything they can, because they're evaluated based on outcomes, right? So they have a vested interest in making sure the kids get it. So I'll just ask it again, I guess, is what here is different than current practice in any way?
Love the way you frame that. Our teachers are doing incredible work. This last section that we have pulled up on our big screen here, teaching, reteaching, and assessment of learning, that is our current expectation for practice. Now, it varies greatly from classroom to classroom because there's autonomy associated with that. But that is our expectation, and that is our practice. If we go up to the top of the policy in regards to tests and quizzes, part of what I referenced in regards to the conversation and the depth of things that we've asked questions about, that we haven't asked questions about from our office in a bit, has been in regards to the release of tests and quizzes. When we started some additional conversations about that, I think we've evolved quite a bit with technology. And there are some things that technology allows to happen more easily and naturally, and there are some things that technology actually sometimes makes it a little bit more difficult to do, such as release. You know, if I have a digital assessment, as an example, and I have created and such that if there are 4 people sitting next to each other, all 4 of them get a different variation of that assessment. Sometimes it makes it a little bit more difficult to release that assessment and for everyone to have their own individual copy, as an example, especially if it's grading along the way. Like, there are all kinds of aspects that have kind of evolved as technology has evolved. I do think that we have less tests and quizzes going home now than we've had, you know, 5 years in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years. So this policy has caused us to have some additional conversations about why that is the case, and how we can help support teachers in disseminating which of those can go home and which of those should be going home and which of those do indeed have protected test items that should be protected for test security. So that conversation is refined, and I would say that this part of the policy helps clarify what our practice will be moving forward, and it does shift us a little bit. So the end of the policy, not too many shifts. The beginning of the policy, this is, I think, where we'll spend a majority of, when this is passed, and even if it isn't, if I'm honest, this is where a majority of our conversation is going to take place. Does that answer it for you, Mr. Brown?
Thank you.
On the page 2, just that very first line, it just, if the will of the board was to leave this section, which I think I would still advocate for removing it entirely, but if it was to leave, I would hope we could maybe change, because right now teachers or teaching teams shall have a method for reteaching and reassessment. So it just in my mind, it reads like there's no option for that, really. So if we could change it to may have or can have, or I don't know there, but I just, if it's not really going to be that they have to do reassessments, retakes, that's not going to be the expectation, then I would really, really like to see the shall removed from that language.
So Tony, the definition of reassessment is not a retake.
I realize that, but some people will take it that way.
So, if I may.
Yeah, yeah.
I think what you're going at is it's not thinking. So I think they should have a retesting and reassessment formula, because that's what we're talking about is the learning here, and if you didn't get it, we want you to understand. Right, exactly. And the reassessment part, I'm not as strong on. I think if I'm correct, I think you're where I am with it. It's the regrading portion that you're requiring it, which again, I feel better when it doesn't have that, but maybe that's what's missing in it, is just putting in some language in it that says, however it's worded, nothing in here says you have to regrade.
Which that was kind of what you had said, wasn't it?
Right.
Like adding that at the end.
Yeah, and that's not a very poetic way to put it, but I think that's, wordsmith it. But I think that's at the end. That would make me comfortable with it.
Donna's got a question on the phone.
Thank you. I just kind of want to echo this. I brought this up in policy meetings. I really think we need to change shall to may. I think it would give the teachers more autonomy, and it just. I think that removing shall, because then it sounds more mandatory, and I'd like to make it more permissive, so they're allowed the freedom to do it, but they're not required to.
I'd like to just make a note.
Or to remove it altogether. But I will go with what the will of the board says. But that's just my thought.
Yeah. The examples or the recommendation from the teacher that she sent to the board kind of addresses that issue. And in my opinion is I would prefer that part not to be in there, the second page. But if it was, I would definitely go with a recommendation by the teacher that she gave in the email to the board. I thought that was very clear and precise, but yeah. And then I would also like to see, it saddens me to, when I think of a student who, doesn't have the desire to, to work for that semester on grades because they did so poorly on that first test. And I'd like to just see the IEP team, work on some kind of remediation for that particular student, and make it so that they can be successful and learn from it and grow, and have accountability. So if the team could work on that kind of stuff, that would be a desire of mine.
It seems like we have at least two options. Certainly one of those is we just bring this language to the board meeting Monday night, and amendments can be brought as anyone sees fit. The other option, because there's been so many different things brought up about language changes, that is to maybe take this off the agenda, go back and get that language consistent with what we think the consensus might be, and then bring it back at the next meeting for a second reading. But knowing that would put us into the school year if we were to do that, which may create another set of issues.
Can we not come to consensus tonight on some of the word changing and then vote
I
on
think
that?
I'm completely comfortable with adding the language that I think addresses that this is not necessarily a grade thing, but a learning thing. And so, I'm totally comfortable with amending. This is kind of my.
I am too.
So, hang on, let me pull it up. The last line was, it would just be adding a sentence at the end that says, methods should be chosen by the teacher or teaching team and may not necessarily lead to grade changes.
And would that need to also be accompanied by changing shall to may in the first sentence of that paragraph, or not?
No.
Well, that was a recommended change by this teacher.
I'm totally comfortable with the last sentence. The first sentence, I think, goes against, it actually directly contradicts the current practice that we have. The expectation is that they shall have a method for reassessment, not for regrading necessarily, which is reflected in that last sentence. But they do have to reteach and reassess whether the students are getting the material.
So would staff agree with that statement, that if you change it from shall to may, that it undermines or waters down your current practice?
Yes, I agree with that. And if you're reteaching something, the only way for you to know if the student learned is to reassess. And there are informal ways of doing that, formal ways of doing that. And it can be a whole class thing, or it could be an individual. And given the autonomy to the teachers to choose that is important. But it is one of our practices is is to continue to ask the question, what are you going to do when the students don't learn? You have to reteach it if those are essential standards, if those are things that the students really need to know. If you're teaching math, and that's factoring, you don't just leave a kid without learning how to factor. You're going to continue to go back and reteach. And if you reteach, the only way you know if little Lee Webb has learned how to factor is if you reassess her. And I can do that by talking to her. It could be formal. There are lots of different ways to do that within our teaching practice. It doesn't have to be big and massive and tied to grades. It's about learning. If you change it to May, it leaves it an option to when that student doesn't learn it the first time to go back and do something about it if it's essential. And it's not every single thing. It's what the teams have determined to be essential. And that second sentence there on essential standards.
We'd really be better off without that paragraph being in there than it changing to May.
Agreed. But
So
the
do we
parents
feel
are better
more-
off with it in there
Yeah.
because they don't see it, and they can see it now.
I
with
think
it.
that's really the question we have to answer about consensus tonight is there more consensus to remove the paragraph entirely as originally proposed? Or is there more consensus to leave it and add the sentence at the end, the clarifying sentence at the end?
So if we changed it to may, that's not ideal, you're saying, from shall. If we remove it entirely, it kind of you would still do, I guess, what you're doing. If we keep it shall and we add the like the grade, the language at the end.
I agree with what you're saying, Mr. Bostic. I get your dilemma. We didn't bring this aspect to you guys to approve. It's our practice. But if a policy is created and you want it to clearly establish what we're doing, this paragraph most closely, from everything that we've described, most closely depicts what our expectation of practice is. We're not perfect at it. This is what we strive to do.
And it's a professional teacher discussion, but I get how it could be misunderstood by somebody who's not living that on a daily basis, right? And that's part of what, that teacher spoke to.
But that's where the additional sentence, I think, solves our issue, because that clarifies to anybody that thinks that this is simply a regrading scenario. Then right.
So Tanya, you initially brought the idea of removing the last paragraph, but I'm hearing you say now you're okay to not do that, but to add the sentence at the end. Am I hearing you correctly or not?
I still think my preference is to not have it, but if it's the will of the board to have it, I like that language better than the way it is written.
That's where
I think
my preference would be to remove it, but if.
because if we're already, it's a dilemma. Because if we're already doing those things, then why are we explicitly having to say it in the policy?
Well, and
There's at least 3 or 4 I've heard say remove the paragraph as the first preference, and then if not, then the second option is, so I don't know if I can call that consensus.
Well, but
I agree.
if we were.
And we have 7 people participating too.
Yeah.
by the way.
Exactly.
Just from like a
And Donna has weighed in.
standpoint,
Oh,
would
I'm sorry,
it
8.
would it be
Donna's
better
weighed in.
off that we, let's say if we can't come to a consensus on what to do here tonight, I guess it would be better off to bring an amendment to vote to strike the whole paragraph, vote on that, see if there's consensus for that, and then if not, it would be.
Yeah,
Well, let's
that's
start
what
with-
that's what I'm thinking.
That's
that
what I was about to say.
Let's
So
start-
we changed the language to
Let's
what's.
start with let's start with adding, let's add the additional sentence as what we take to the board.
Can
and then-
can somebody tell me that sentence one more
We'll
time?
get-
I have.
I'll make sure you get it.
Oh, fantastic. My computer died. Okay.
Well, this is the sentence is added for Monday night, If somebody wants to try to strike it and see how many board members want to do that, then do that on Monday. If not, we're not going to be trying to edit any more language. Like, y'all are cool with it if it doesn't. I mean, I'm cool with that. Like, we don't get to vote tonight. So like that, I think that works for me. But that reflects, as opposed to having to add it back. Like, I mean, this language has been here for like this is like our 5th reading or something like that. So,
I think it's more than that.
So help me understand, not to belabor this, but help me understand as a practical matter, why we wouldn't have an amendment to strike the last paragraph. And if there's no consensus to strike the last paragraph, then somebody makes a motion to add the last sentence. So it's the reverse of what you just said.
The other way.
well, no, I think we can add the sentence now, because the consensus in the room is if we don't strike the paragraph, then they would like to have the sentence there.
That sentence
So
is
that-
important.
And,
Put the sentence in.
yeah, and the policy, as it's been through, has had the paragraph instead of it being removed. So I think that's the easiest way to go. It's gonna take one amendment, it's gonna take one motion. Do you strike the paragraph or not? If it fails, then we vote on this one. If we strike it, then we vote on the policy minus the paragraph.
To that point, I haven't heard anyone opposed to the additional words from that sentence that was sent, at least from
I
our
haven't either.
discussion. Might not be the first choice, but not opposed to it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the shall, but.
So just to be clear, we're starting with the second choice and then going back to the first choice if second choice doesn't hold.
Yes.
So does that,
Yeah, so if
am I the only one that doesn't make sense to?
on Monday night, I will make an amendment.
I don't think there's consensus to remove the paragraph today.
Right.
Right.
But,
Well, I think there actually is, but
I don't
mean,
think there is. I mean, the definition of consensus is that we can't all agree.
I've
and
heard
so
4
there's
people
no
say that
consensus.
they would prefer to remove the
That's called a
paragraph.
vote, but that's not consensus.
It's discussion.
But it's not consensus of
It's not-
counting how many people.
It's not a majority.
It's not a consensus. Like, that, it's by definition, there's no consensus around the room. We've just got to figure out how to move forward.
So
to
I
the
will,
vote.
I would like to refer to something that I believe Dr. Webb said at the last policy meeting, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you said that while this is the practice, it's not uniform across all schools. And so having this in the policy would give you all, something to point towards to bring those other schools in line. So that's where that stuck with me, clearly. And so that's where because before you said that, I was leaning towards removing all of this as well. And so I do think it's important to include for that reason, but I would feel a lot more comfortable including it with that last sentence in place, the new sentence added, to make it clear that it will not lead to a new grade.
So do you have the language for that last sentence? So let's have that added, and then that will be what's before us Monday night. If someone feels strongly that the last paragraph should be stricken, then make the motion to do that. All right. Any more discussion on that? We got one more to get to, and that's 6.411 student wellness. And Tanya, that's back to you again. Yes.
Oh, okay. So this one should be short and sweet. This is just, in the original copy that I sent to Dana, it included the middle school, well, not these exact wordings, but that the middle school students would not be able to spend time on an electronic device during time meant for physical activity or socialization, because there were schools who would use that free time, like maybe on a rainy day, and then the students had an option to be on their some kind of device. And so just to make, even if we have a technology policy that might state it, I would like it stated on this policy as well. And I wanted to know if we could make some kind of a amendment to that before Monday.
So, Mr. Chair, if I understand, what you're asking for is some language that establishes that.
Like on line 3 of the 3rd page.
Yeah.
Middle, yeah.
Did middle schools, did use of electronic devices for middle school students, it cannot be part of the recess time?
Yes.
Yeah. That actually fits our standard, so, yeah, that won't be, that
Yeah,
won't
and
be a
that's,
problem.
and Dr. Webb had mentioned that earlier, and I just want to make sure it's in there for me. And that's my only request.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
just
so if
for-
it's, and that's
yeah,
fine.
just for middle school.
But just so everyone is clear, elementary will stay the same.
Yes.
Middle school will be separated out to be walking to and from class and time spent on an electronic device. And then high school would then be walking to and from class.
Well,
That's why I wanted to
mean,
be clear.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, because we haven't come up to any any discussion, any conclusion on
Right,
that
and that
yet.
doesn't mean at some point,
Yes.
this could not change.
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm on the same page as you.
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that that my intent for middle school is being addressed.
Got it.
Because
Okay.
of parent wishes. And
Sure.
so I just would like it in there to make sure, because we don't know what it's going to be like for the technology portion of it. So if everyone's okay with that.
Yes.
Okay.
So on both those last two, we'll see the drafts in the board packet, the new drafts in the board packet prior to Monday, or whenever they get sent out.
Correct. Whenever they are
Published.
then there will be changes to 3 policies in green.
Okay.
In green.
Green, yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, thanks for the good discussion. We're adjourned.